Hey, my name is Shelise Sola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're listening only, you're definitely going to want to see this one. Head on over to my YouTube channel at Cults to Consciousness, where you can like, subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss an episode. Leave your comments. We would like to start featuring comments now, so if you have anything burning that you would like to ask, leave it below. And today's guest, you probably already recognize the studio. I am currently sitting in the Mormon Stories studio, amped up because today's guest is the number one voice in the ex-Mormon space and even the Mormon space. He has a PhD in counseling psychology. He has been podcasting since 2005, and he has been featured on many different publications and a whole bunch of other podcasts. He is an expert voice in this space, and he is here with me today. So thank you so much for joining me, John Dehlin.
Hey, Shelise. Nice to meet you in person.
It's so nice to meet you in person. It's a little crazy being here in real life because I've watched your podcast for so long, so it's an honor to be here.
And I've been just delighted at the quick and rapid growth of your YouTube channel and your kind of production quality.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely have my fiance / co-producer to thank for that.
Jonathan's in the house.
Jonathan's in the house. Yeah, so I'm thrilled to be here. I have been watching your show for years now, and it's so nice to hear your perspectives, to hear your guest perspectives. Everyone just has so much to offer. And so now I'm just curious, after thousands of interviews, I want to know what you would do if you were the prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because I know in your interviews you always say, look, I'm not trying to burn the church to the ground. I just want to make it a better place so people have a healthier environment to raise their families, to basically worship in a way that is good and healthy and, have their own thing. So I cannot wait to hear your responses on what you think and what you would do, because also, let me just continue my rant here. You have done so many different things that have actually changed policies within the church. I mean, people, and I've joked on my podcast before that you're kind of more of a prophet than the current prophet in the way that you affect change. So some examples here: exposing harmful rhetoric about miracle forgiveness, and it gets pulled from Deseret Book. You do a TED Talk on changing LGBTQ plus policies, and lo and behold, the church makes some changes. You inspired Jeremy Reynolds to write the CES letter. So many things, and it's amazing. Let me just applaud you in person. Congratulations on doing such a great job. So let's dive into it.
And I guess I just have to give a caveat that I can't take credit for all that stuff at all. Some of that is kind of correlation, not causation. And any of us stand on the shoulders of giants that have made it possible for us to do what we do. So there's a combination caveat of I owe everything I do to a lot of great, amazing people. And a lot of that stuff I had maybe had some part in, but maybe shared a lot of credit with a lot of courageous, smart, capable people.
I mean, yeah, he's being humble, guys. I would say that you are a big part of this, but that's also why I wanted to do this episode and just see what your thoughts are. And if you did have the opportunity to change some things and make it a safer environment for its members, what would that look like? So take it away, John.
Okay, so you just want me to kind of list changes I would make to the Mormon Church if I were prophet? Is that right?
Yes, changes you would make, and we can go deeper into each topic if you would like. It's all up to you.
All right. Yeah, because people ask me all the time, is there anything the church could do to get you back? Right? Mm-hmm. And that's a complicated question, because in many ways, I'm one of the weird sort of scenarios where I didn't leave the church because it hurt me overtly or because I was having a bad experience in it. I mean, obviously as a white, straight, cisgender male who's upper middle class and semi-educated, the church was kind of made by and for me, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
So, so I just, and not to say that white guys can't be harmed by the church, obviously, but in my case, I didn't lose my faith in the church or leave it because of significant trauma that I'd experienced, or even because I was having a bad experience. It was more things like the history and the truth claims and the way I saw the church harming other marginalized communities. So anyway, so when I talk about the church or the possibility of ever returning to it, it's more about changes it would need to make for other people.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, it's really empathetic of you to consider other people, because some people are very tunnel vision. They're like, well, I'm not hurt in the church, so why does it need to change? Like, you guys are just being wimps or something. Yeah. But it's very empathetic for you, especially because you see these stories firsthand and you interview these people, these heart-wrenching stories. So, all right. So what would be your first change?
So I think the first thing, if I were made prophet, if I were rebaptized into the church and made prophet, the Mormon Church, the first thing I would do is get the church to formally apologize for all the ways it's deceived or harmed people. Because, the church will talk about these things later because they're their own segments that need to be dealt with. But as you've probably talked about a lot in your podcast, the Mormon Church has not been open and honest with its problematic history. The Mormon Church has several credible science-based and evidence-based challenges to its truth, to its absolute truth claims that are deeply problematic. And then the Mormon Church has harmed a lot of marginalized communities. And so step one would be for the church to just offer a massive apology and say, we, the Mormon Church, we are sorry for our misogyny, for making women institutional second-class citizens for over 2 centuries. We're sorry for our racism. We're sorry for excluding, Black members from full membership and participation for, 180 years. We're sorry for telling Native Americans that their skin was dark because their ancestors were wicked and that God made their skin dark so that they would be loathsome to the white man and woman, which is factually incorrect and also grossly racist.
Yes.
All the LGBTQ, all the deaths by suicide and the depression and anxiety for the church's homophobic policies, the way that it's broken up families, mixed faith marriages and divided families asunder. There's just so much that the church needs to atone for, the way that it's extracted hundreds of billions of dollars, not to mention time and reputation of its members under kind of fraudulent terms. And I'm to an active believing Mormon, my words are probably sounding super duper harsh. I don't hate the Mormon Church. I don't want to see it destroyed. And I think I'm of the rare opinion that I think the church has done a lot of good. And this will be the most heretical thing I say on your podcast, maybe the Mormon Church net does more good than bad. I think I'm ambivalent about that question. So even though my words are pretty harsh, they don't come from a place of hate or malice towards the church. It's just like clean up your mess. Like the U.S. government's made a huge mess, and I'm still a citizen of the U.S. government. Like there isn't a corporation. I used to work for Microsoft. Like there isn't a large organization on the planet that hasn't done a lot of harm. So when I speak harshly about the Mormon Church, it's just it's from a realization that large organizations often cause harm, and the Mormon Church is no exception to that. So the church taught all of us when you sin, the church taught us the steps for repentance. It's things like confess the sin,
accountability.
Accountability. You forsake the sin, you stop doing the sin, you confess it, you try and make restitution. And then you never do it again.
Right.
And, the church knows how to repent because it makes all of us, it shames so many of us into this sort of very unhealthy and shameful sort of repentance. for things that we actually have no business even apologizing or repenting for. So the church should be a world-class leader in apologizing and repenting, and they don't. So that would be number one. And we could probably spend 10 years as a church just apologizing in all the ways we need to apologize. So that's step one.
Step one.
Do I pause and let you respond?
I think that is a great step one. I think the reason why they don't do it is because people would be like, oh, so you're admitting that you did something wrong. And by admitting you did something wrong, that means that there's something that I need to check into. Like, I didn't know about the Lamanite thing. Honestly, I didn't learn about that whole racist history with the Lamanites until, I don't know, 2020. I was like, wait, I was supposed to believe that? I had no idea.
Yeah.
So by them admitting, it would cause their members to say, oh, so all of these things I had heard in the past were not ex-Mormon literature. It was actually truth. I don't know if they could withstand that because, I mean, what's your opinion? Do you think that the members would be like, you know what, that was really brave of them. I'm glad that they took responsibility. Or do you think they'd be like, yeah, I'm out of here?
Yeah. So in my view, so once upon a time, I'll tell a quick little story. Once upon a time, my older brother, Joel, worked at church headquarters at the highest levels of the church. So we're talking worked on a daily basis with members of the First Presidency, the Quorum of the 12, because he was the head of IT. He was a managing director over computers and technology for the whole church. And he was friends with Elder Bednar and Elder Holland and all these apostles. And during kind of my, the early years of the podcast and then my own faith crisis, he's like, hey, John, why don't I set up a lunch with you and Elder Holland, one of the apostles of the church. So I spent weeks planning for that lunch with Elder Holland. And, I didn't want to just like ask him a bunch of gotcha questions because by that point I didn't believe anymore. But I didn't want to embarrass my brother. I didn't want to hurt his job. I didn't want to, make the guy, I didn't want to ambush the guy. So I thought, okay, he'll probably ask me for advice. Whether or not he intended to actually follow it, he would probably ask just to be polite. And so I thought for days and weeks, what's some advice I would give Elder Holland when he asks? But I gave myself a couple rules about the advice. It had to be advice that wouldn't weaken the church.
Interesting.
And when I say weaken the church, I mean decrease its tithing, decrease its active membership. And that was the only criteria, right? It would have to improve the church and not damage it. And I couldn't think of one.
Really?
I literally couldn't think of one thing.
Wow.
And here's why. The whole premise of Mormonism is that God speaks to prophets today, that God spoke to Enoch and Amos and Elijah and, David and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Ezekiel and, Peter, James, and John. And, God speaking to prophets has not ceased. That just like he spoke with Joseph Smith, he's spoken with every prophet, seer, and revelator from Joseph Smith till today. That's the whole premise. That's the value proposition of Mormonism, that our leaders speak to and for God and Jesus themselves. And that's the secret sauce of Mormonism, that when you hear the leader speak, you basically are hearing from the counsels from Jesus and God's own lips.
Right.
So if they were to say, we got it wrong on women, blacks, black people, LGBT people, Lamanites, the Book of Mormon, Scripture, we were deceiving you all about our problematic history.
Yeah.
And we got all this money through fraudulent means. Sorry, everyone.
Whoops.
But we're still talking to God now. And listen, polygamy was the first strike. Like, everybody do polygamy. Okay, never mind. You can stop polygamy. And then giving black people the priesthood and full fellowship. It's like, okay, God changed his mind again a second time. If the church just keeps doing this, the members are going to catch on and say, I think you're just making this up. And at that point, they're kind of screwed. So that, this apology would damage the church irreparably. I mean, it would still exist because there's a lot of people that make a lot of money off of the church. There's a lot of people who would lose too much if they left, but the church would never be the same.
Yeah. And what do you do with that? I mean, when they clearly owe everyone an apology, but they can't do it, they just have to gaslight us and say, well, we never said that. We never taught that.
Now, what they do is they make slow changes over time, never explain why.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they've, over a decade or 2 or 3, completely transitioned to the new way of life, like no polygamy, like trying to be more honest about its history, treating women a little bit better, being less racist, whatever it is, then once they've fully made that transition, enough generations have died off, then the church is like, what? We've always loved black people. What? We've always loved women. Like, we love LGBT people. What's the, because the memory, people's memories are short,
Yeah, especially when you make a change that maybe skips a generation. So then the new people in the church are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Crazy temple ceremonies and like slitting your throat. That must be ex-Mormon rhetoric.
That's not the Mormon church. I never saw that in the temple, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even now when the church does something that appears pro-LGBT, it's like, what are you talking about? We love LGBT people. We just supported legislation.
Yes.
It's like, how about the decades of like conversion therapy and electroshock therapy at
BYU.
Yeah. And like, it's like, what, that Elder Oaks is like, that never happened on my watch. And we're like, oh, okay, Elder Oaks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, the memory hole is real. The memory hole is real.
Yes. Yeah. So apologize is number 1. What would be your number 2?
Man, this is a long list.
It is a long list.
So we're going to be here a while. Okay. So the second thing on my list is informed consent. So many people are raised in Mormonism or join Mormonism under completely false pretenses.
Yes.
So the best example of this right now is the church is doing a full court press in Africa, growing by leaps and bounds in one of the only continents left that we neglected because of our racist past.
Yes.
For, well over a century. But B, they probably have maybe a little bit less access to the internet than maybe other continents. I don't know. But like, there's just enough poverty there to where the church can kind of still really pull a fast one over an entire continent of people. Mm-hmm. So the church is doing this full court press in Africa. They're baptizing Africans like gangbusters. It's really the only continent in the world where the Mormon church is actually growing. But it's baptizing all these black people, never telling them that for over 150 years, the church literally institutionally excluded their ancestors from temple service, from full membership, from priesthood participation, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Well, that's outrageous. Mm-hmm. If the church has this super racist past, it would be like the KKK, no longer burning crosses, and then like recruiting black people into the KKK as like a Elks Lodge Masonic fellowship, never really happening to mention when they sign on the dotted line that the KKK has a super racist past. Like that would never fly, but the Mormon church does that all the time. And it's not just racism, but in terms of its history, and this would be with people born and raised in the church, I got to the age of 31 never hearing the word polyandry in my whole life. Now, what's polyandry? And you're like thinking, wait, do you mean polygamy, John? No, I mean polyandry. What's polyandry, John? It's the fact that Joseph Smith married, amongst the 30 plus women that Joseph Smith, Mormon Church's founder, amongst the 30 plus women that Joseph Smith married, 12 of them were actually married to other men at the time he married them.
He sends their husbands on missions and then like, oh, I'll take you in, don't worry.
Yeah. Like, why was I 31? I had served a 2-year mission for my church. I had gone to 3 hours of church for like 30 years each week. And I, went to all that BYU religious schooling and early morning seminary for 4 years in high school. No one ever told me that super basic thing. Or that Joseph Smith married 14-year-old girls, that he married mother-daughter pairs, that he married sister pairs. Never once in my entire existence, 45 years within the Mormon church, on a Sunday did I ever hear any mention of Joseph Smith's wives other than Emma being a single wife. That's fraud. That'd be like joining Bernie Madoff's business and never hearing about all the people that he defrauded. Like, that's outrageous. And that's just 2 of like 1,000 issues that the church has hidden from not only its members, but from the world.
Yeah, and not only hidden, but outright lied about. Like showing the depictions of Joseph Smith translating the plates. And then later they're like, well, there was a hat. I remember when my friend first told me about that story, I was like, no, that's not how it works. I would know. I'm a Mormon, in high school trying to fit in when I moved to Portland and no longer in the Mormon bubble. And everyone had all these questions. And I'm like, that's just anti-Mormon. I had no idea it was actually true.
Yeah, the stone in the hat's a big one.
Yeah.
Stone in the hat, the Kinderhook plates, the Book of Abraham problems.
Well, the Book of Mormon problems.
Yeah, exactly. The anachronisms, like why are there horses in the Book of Mormon when there are no horses in the Americas during the time of the Book of Mormon?
Yeah.
But the church has kept all of this. So informed consent would be my second choice, which basically would be devastating to the church, but it would basically be the church saying, here's the truth about our history. Here's the truth about all the ways that we've harmed everybody. And we'll educate all the members. And if anyone's going to join the church, we'll give you a full education on the church's problematic past. And then if you want to join or if you want to stay a member, great.
Yes.
And that would probably involve raising the baptism age from 8 to 18. Because how in the world could you ever teach an 8-year-old? How could an 8-year-old ever even have the maturity and the intelligence to understand the implications of all the problematic history?
Right.
Before they've at least lived a little bit of life. So I mean, 16, 17, 18 would be the ages where you could start to distribute that curriculum amongst your membership so that then they could, by the time they're an adult, decide if they wanted to be a lifelong member or not. Because make no mistake, when you join the Mormon Church, you're giving 2 years of your life for a mission. You're given several hours a week in church service, your identity, your reputation, and 10% of your income and your posterity. You're giving all of that to the church. And your eternity, in theory. So, like, you at least deserve to know what you're buying when you buy it.
I mean, I would even argue in the church's standards, if you can teach a 12-year-old about how to become a mother, you can teach a 12-year-old about the actual history of the church. Start in young women's and young men's. If you want to raise it up, maybe like 14 and 15 when they're old enough to really start to understand it in the church's eyes. Because, again, if you can teach a woman how to become a mother and get married in the temple at 12, you should be able to give them the full scope of everything. Yeah. So I 100% agree with that. And also, at the very least, just teaching the missionaries the full truth so that they can go out armed, because you're sending these children out into the world against people who know the information about the church, and they're becoming bombarded with questions and they don't know how to answer them. They just think it's, just this isn't true. But imagine if they actually had the answers to those questions, those hard questions. Oh yeah, this is what the church says is the reason for that, instead of just being a deer in the headlights and going, I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So informed consent's number 2.
Okay.
Yeah. Be honest and open about its history and its problems.
Okay.
We keep going?
Let's keep going.
Number 3 is make women equal citizens in the church. I mean, the one of the roughest, most disturbing things about Mormonism is this $1 trillion American church. And if it's not worth $1 trillion now, it will be very soon. It's certainly worth $500 billion right now. And it takes 7 years for those investments to double? Like, if it's not $1 trillion church, it will be soon. It somehow has built its power and wealth on the backs of women, while subjugating them as second-class citizens. It's a form of indentured servitude. I don't know what to say, but women are, in 2022, women are second-class citizens and are not allowed to be leaders in the church. They're not allowed to kind of control their own budgets, make their own decisions. They can't even hold girls' camp.
By themselves.
Women can't even bring girls on girls' camp without having men chaperoning. It's a outrageous patriarchy. And not only is that discriminatory towards women, it's self-undermining to the church itself. Imagine if the full power of women were unleashed within the Mormon Church. They could have prevented all these, all this abuse of children. They could have prevented probably a lot of the LGBT deaths and problems if women had been fully enfranchised. Maybe a lot of different decisions would have been made around gender, around sexual identity, around sexual shame, around disciplinary councils. Like, there's so many problems with the Mormon Church that if women had been fully enfranchised, you kind of, I think you have a good case to make that those problems would have never been allowed to exist and or continue if women had been fully enfranchised. So step up and make women equal citizens would be number 3.
Absolutely. I agree with
Do you
that.
agree?
I always say that it seems like the church is stuck in the 50s of this this little housewife picturesque thing where they want them to get married at 19, have babies by 20 so that they're just right back into the system, raise the babies as Mormons, and you just multiply and multiply. But you're right. It would be so great if women could just step up into their power and really make the difference that we know that they can make and have their voices heard. But I mean, I wonder what the leaders are so afraid of. I mean, they have quotes saying like, don't be too loud, sisters, like don't insert your opinion, like actually telling them sit down and don't speak. But what are they afraid of is going to happen if they stand up and speak?
That's a great question. And make no mistake, feminism is the issue that the brethren are most terrified of, by far. They're more terrified of feminism than they are racism, getting right on racism, being honest about its history. And I think it just has to do with power. Like their power is rooted in their maleness. And as soon as you open up leadership and decision-making to women, you're cutting your power in half. I remember reading Martin Luther King Jr. books, during kind of my intellectual awakening. And Martin Luther King Jr. made the quote, "Power never relinquishes itself voluntarily. It must be forced."
Wow.
And yet you think about it, giving Black people the priesthood doesn't disempower men. It just makes more men able to have the priesthood, right? Even being honest about your history allows the men to stay in power. But as soon as you allow the women in on the power franchise, you're cutting your power and influence in half. That's probably it. You can probably just stop right there. But that's probably why they do it. But also it's the undermining of authority. If the church is on record saying priesthood is for men for 200 plus years, and the Bible, you don't see a lot of female prophets or prophetesses in the Bible for whatever reason. They're probably excluded. But for all those reasons, the church is just, that's their biggest fear, is empowering women, which is so gross and unfortunate.
It is very unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because like you said, women could make a huge difference in the church in a positive way. Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, just imagine taking all of your most talented and amazing people and then dividing that in half and saying half of you need to sit down. That's what they're doing. Yeah. And plus women offer gifts and talents and perspectives that men can't.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you want to talk about how, it's funny, the men always say, this is how you raise a family, but women, it's your job. It's like, why don't you ask the women how to raise a family? If you're making that their priority, why don't you ask them and let them speak on it?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So that's the next one. Empower women.
Okay.
Keep going.
Move right along.
So the church needs to fix its racism because it's not like the racism's in the past. Like, it turns out that the Mormons, worship 4 basic, scriptures. There's the Holy Bible, there's the Book of Mormon, there's the Book of Moses and the Book of Abraham, and then the Doctrine and Covenants. And guess what? Like, of those 5 books, which is the least racist? Can you guess?
I would guess the Bible.
The Bible is the least racist. And we've been covering this on our LDS discussion series on Mormon Stories podcast.
Yeah.
Because the root of Mormon racism is this stupid curse of Cain doctrine.
Yeah.
That when Cain killed Abel, God put a mark on Cain, which is what the Bible says. But then 18th, 19th century Christians interpreted that mark to be black skin so that they could justify the enslavement of Africans. And so that's where Joseph Smith learned about the curse of Cain doctrine being black skin, which was not in the Bible. But then Joseph one-upped the racism in the Bible, because the Bible is racist. But Joseph Smith one-upped the racism in the Bible by injecting the curse of Cain doctrine explicitly into the Book of Moses, the Book of Abraham, and the Doctrine and Covenants, And then it's in the Book of Mormon in the form of the Lamanite curse, because, you know, we got to explain the darkness of these Lamanites, and they don't look quite African, and they're Jewish somehow. So how do we account for their dark skin? Because obviously they were cursed.
Yeah.
So we'll make them cursed because of their wickedness. And so like Joseph Smith is like more super racist than traditional biblical Christianity. And that's all codified in Mormon scripture.
Yeah.
So the Mormon Church, to fix its racism problem, it needs to start with its own scripture and take out, this is blasphemy, this is heresy, take out all the super racist parts of the Book of Mormon, Book of Moses, Book of Abraham, Doctrine and Covenants. And of course, it's never going to do that. But it's like a ball and chain. The Mormon Church is ball and chain bound to its racism because it's codified in Joseph Smith's own scripture.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't just double down on racism. He like tripled down on racism.
Yeah.
And yeah, even if, Mormon Church, if you're listening, even if you want to just secretly slide that stuff out and then pretend it never happened, that's still better than still actively teaching that it's part of the scriptures. But again, that leads to the whole problem of, well, the Book of Mormon is the most correct book on the planet, and it's never changing. And if you were to take something like that out, then you're saying Joseph Smith got it wrong, or he translated it wrong.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
what does that lead to?
And then what else did he get wrong?
Well, especially with the polygamy thing. I mean, everyone's like, well, Mormons don't do that anymore, and that's very much looked down on. You could get excommunicated if you practice. But it's still in the Book of Mormon, or is it the D&C? It's still in D&C. So how do you get around that?
Yeah.
Just pretend it never happened.
Yeah. And that's just fixing the scriptures. Like, its leadership is still super white, Utah, Idaho, Mormon leadership. And then it's taught forever. It still teaches that mixed race marriages are bad things.
Does it still?
Oh, yeah. You can still find, just within the past few years, passages in our, gospel studies manuals that basically say, marry within your race kind of thing. That's still a teaching of the Mormon Church today. So it's got to fix all that, clean up its curriculum, clean up all the folk doctrines, apologize for its racist past, obviously, and then start empowering people of color in all the leadership positions to have representation. And, there's so much more it needs to do. So fix this racism would be the next one.
All right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Keep
Sounds
going?
good. What's next?
Okay, the next one is to fix its LGBTQ plus problem, because the Mormon Church has taught for 50 plus years that homosexuality is an abomination, to quote the church, that it's a perversion,
right?
That it's like bestiality, that it comes from masturbating too much, and that it's it's a step on the pathway towards pedophilia. Like, all these horrific things I'm saying right now are things the church has been teaching for 50 plus years. And not to mention encouraging celibacy for its LGBTQ plus members if they can't marry in a mixed orientation marriage, and then encouraging mixed orientation marriages where you're gay or lesbian, but you're marrying a straight guy or a straight woman, and then confining yourself to a marriage where you're not attracted to, or maybe even have aversion sexually towards the person you're married to.
Yeah.
And then, they're not getting their needs met because you're not into them. And then all the kids become collateral damage when 70% of these marriages end in divorce, which is a much higher divorce rate than most first marriages, right? It's 2 to 3 times the divorce rates of first marriages traditionally. Not to mention all the LGBTQ youth that feel like this life is just to either be celibate or to be stuck with someone you're not attracted to for the rest of your life. You may as well die so that when you get to the other side, Heavenly Father will fix you. I say that in air quotes. And that's why we have 2 to 3 times the national average of LGBT youth death by suicide or suicide attempts, because of this horrendous doctrine, plus all the family rejection. We know that family rejection leads to like 8 times the normal prevalence of risky drug use, of risky sexual behavior, if your family rejects you.
Yeah.
And in Mormonism, if you're a super Orthodox devout Mormon parent and your kid comes out as gay, It's like, you follow the rules. Oh, if you're going to start dating who you shouldn't date, or even, God forbid, experimenting sexually, you're out of the house. These kids become homeless or they become rejected. And that's why we have such a epidemic of depression, anxiety, and death by suicide within Mormonism. It's horrific how much death and carnage, social carnage, that's come about as a result of the Mormon Church's homophobia.
Yeah, and this isn't even something that's in the past, because what was the 2015 policy that directly affected children? It was put in place, and the amount of suicides in that time. Do you want to explain to our listeners who aren't familiar what that policy was in 2015?
Yeah, so basically, the church was the leader in fighting same-sex marriage within the United States for decades. We beat evangelical Christians, which is no tough feat. We beat Catholics. Like, we were the leader. When you think about like the early fighting of same-sex marriage in Hawaii or Massachusetts or California prior to Prop 8, which was Prop 22, I think, like, we were behind all that. But then in 2008, after same-sex marriage was legalized in California and a few other states, the church is like, no, we're not having any of that. So the Mormon Church started Prop 8, and which basically meant it spent tens of millions of dollars and countless volunteer time manning phone banks and, community canvassers to take same-sex marriage away from citizens of a sovereign state, which is California. And like, ironically, one of the great ironies in American history is that led to backlash that led to same-sex marriage being legalized across the country by 2015. So the church was so bumhurt. Can I say that? Butthurt? Can you cuss on your podcast? The church was so hurt and offended that same-sex marriage was legalized across the country that it came up with this horrific policy in November of 2015 that basically said that same-sex marriage was an act of apostasy that was considered a greater offense than pedophilia, rape, or murder. And you're like, your mouth is open wide, and I'll explain to you why.
Wow.
Yeah. In 2015, you could rape someone, you could molest a child, or you could murder someone, and your excommunication was optional, depending on the judgment of your leader. But in 2015, the church said, we are putting same-sex marriage. Now, let's just be clear. The crime of same-sex marriage is committing your life to the person that you love most. That's the crime of same-sex marriage. The church declared that mandatorily an act of apostasy that requires a disciplinary council and an excommunication. While to this day, there are thousands of Mormons running around who knowingly molested children but were never excommunicated. It was just kind of hush-hush, swept under the rug, because the church never declared pedophilia an act of requiring a disciplinary council and apostasy. It's optional, right? Same with rape. So they made same-sex marriage an act of apostasy and mandatory excommunication. And then they even turned it up to 11, as they say, by also saying that children of same-sex legally married couples could no longer participate in full fellowship in the church. So they couldn't get blessed as babies. They couldn't get baptized as 8-year-old children. They couldn't get the priesthood if men, and they had to wait till they were 18 to get baptized, only if it gets better or worse, only if they explicitly denounce their parents' marriage before they take that plunge into baptism at age 18. That was literally the November 2015 exclusion policy, received by revelation by the prophets, seers, and revelators of the Mormon Church, which meant within Mormon parlance or belief that it was God and Jesus themselves implementing this policy. And it took 4 years, but to the church's credit, or
I guess,
the church, they had the revelation saying that the November policy was of God. And then somehow miraculously God changed his mind And after incredible backlash, massive waves of defection, horrific public relations, embarrassing, outrage sort of, events, the Mormon Church received a miraculous revelation that policy was to be undone after it was implemented by God and Jesus. So God and Jesus needed that policy somehow for 4 years until it almost destroyed the church. And then God and Jesus needed to take that policy away.
Well, they said, whoops, never mind.
Yeah.
And then they even claimed that the first time wasn't a revelation. No, it was just a policy. It wasn't really of God. Like,
No, I mean,
convenient.
in that case, Russell M. Nelson himself, who's the current president prophet of the church, had publicly stated that it was received by revelation.
So they
I don't
no
think
take-backs.
I don't think the church has ever claimed that wasn't revelation.
It was the
they
members.
Just said,
yeah.
new revelation trumps old revelation, right?
Yeah, it must have just been the members that I was hearing it from. They were like, no, guys, that wasn't a revelation.
No, that would not be the church's policy because they would have to say Russell M. Nelson got it wrong.
That's right.
Yeah.
Can't do that.
So is this list too long? Did we go on too long? I mean,
No,
we're
just getting started. This is great. That policy was devastating, I know, to many families who lost children to suicide. There were children who were already baptized going, am I going to get excommunicated because I'm not 18 yet? There's just so much unnecessary confusion. And for what? Like you said, something that does not affect them. It's two people who are in love. They're not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just so much carnage with the LGBTQ policies of the Mormon Church. I mean, all the women that married gay men, all the straight women that married gay men, because the church, bishop blessed the gay man that if he got married to a straight woman, that his gayness would go away if he was faithful enough in Jesus. Imagine what it's like to be a straight woman married to a gay man. Like, I don't mean to shame anybody, and maybe some people make it work, but the majority of these cases is just horrific for the straight spouse, right? Yeah. So anyway, just carnage. So anyway, that's the LGBTQ issue.
One more thing before we move on from that. Can you explain their most recent, I guess you could call it a publicity stunt, where it seemed like they were for LGBTQ, but in reality, it was the opposite?
Yeah. So to the United States Congress's credit, as the Supreme Court has started to undo a lot of historically progressive or liberal landmark cases like Roe versus Wade, the U.S. Congress kind of saw ahead and realized, whoa, now, the genie's a little bit out of the bottle. We've got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of same-sex marriages all over the country. If the Supreme Court rolls back Obergefell, I think is the name of the Supreme Court case, and all of a sudden takes out the federal, Supreme Court ruling that paved the way for same-sex marriage. If the Supreme Court chooses to undo Obergefell like it undid Roe versus Wade, then are states going to be allowed? Like if you were same-sex married in California, but you moved to Alabama, would Alabama be allowed to no longer recognize your marriage in a state you moved to as a same-sex married couple? I may be slaughtering this. This is just my understanding. And so the Congress is like, this will be a disaster for health insurance, for legal reasons, for just kids, for hospital rights, adoption things. Like, this could be chaos if states start declining the acceptance of previously accepted same-sex marriages. And so Congress was on its way to passing legislation that would honor all same-sex marriages across all the different states. That would still allow states, by the way, to not allow same-sex marriages if Obergefell were undone, but at least it would mandate that same-sex marriages, be accepted everywhere. So when the Mormon Church realized that was going to happen, it saw a PR opportunity, and it saw an opportunity to strengthen its power and ability to be bigoted. And this is sounding very cynical and critical, but this is my understanding. We have an episode on this. But basically, they sent their lobbyists, the Mormon Church sent their lobbyists down to Capitol Hill and said, we will support your legislation. We will descend from our throne of power and money and magnanimously throw our support behind their graciousness of allowing same-sex marriages to be honored in perpetuity. Knowing that this was going to pass anyway, we will graciously offer our support to same-sex marriages being legitimized everywhere if you also bake into this legislation the right for religions to continue discriminating against LGBT people. Because what the Mormon Church wants most is to be able to kick that gay student out of BYU if they in any way act on their same-sex sexuality. They want to be able to fire any gay employee that may come out, or any member of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir that may come out as gay. It wants to retain the right to fire or to evict or expel a gay student or a gay employee. And so what it did is it said, we'll support this legislation if you also bake into the legislation our ability to continue homophobic, discriminatory policies. And then the brilliant masterstroke is, to the general membership, all they said is, see, we love gay people.
Yeah.
And so now, like we talked about the memory hole, now the church can sort of like wipe clean its decades long in the minds of the members who aren't wise enough to kind of read the fine print, oftentimes aren't savvy enough, or are programmed with undue influence to be afraid or unmotivated to actually read the fine print.
Yeah.
To the general current membership that's Orthodox, the Mormon Church could say, see, we love gay people. We're not a bigoted church. Now you can go tell all your family and friends that the Mormon Church loves gay people and supports them. That was the PR opportunity, while their actual behaviors were strengthening their ability to discriminate against LGBTQ people. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
If it weren't so diabolical, it would be brilliant. And maybe someone is going to challenge my interpretation of that sequence of events, but I'd love to hear a better explanation.
Yeah, me too. So I'm curious then, John, if you were the prophet of the Mormon Church, would you, this is a two-part question. First, would you allow members of the LGBTQIA community to hold temple marriages? And second part, since you're not actually the prophet, do you think the church will ever allow temple marriages?
So, yes, I would. There's a problem. I guess one of the things I didn't mention on what I would change as a prophet, like the whole temple ordinance stuff is deeply problematic, because what's implicit in Mormon priesthood authority, Mormon exclusive truth claims, and Mormon ordinances, what's implicit or explicit in all of that is that a Mormon baptism counts in the eyes of God, but any other Christian baptism or non-Christian ordinance that tries to be like a baptism is illegitimate in the eyes of God. Mm-hmm. That's sort of like the value proposition of Mormon priesthood authority. Mm-hmm. The Catholic baptisms don't count. Lutheran or Presbyterian baptisms don't count. And the same for marriages. In Mormon church teachings, the only marriage that exists in heaven, the only legitimate marriage that exists in heaven, is a Mormon marriage solemnized in a Mormon temple. Mm-hmm. And that's a offensive and outrageous teaching by any standard. And so if I'm the prophet and we're making changes in the Mormon church, we're starting a little bit upstream to basically say, no, God accepts, if there's a God at all, God doesn't tear up families. God doesn't require a certain marriage by a certain group of white men in Utah or Idaho in a certain location of real estate owned by a $1 trillion corporate mega church. Like that's the only type of marriage that God approves of? Like, no. So like, I think I would probably just say there's no such thing as eternal marriage in a Mormon sense. If you want to get married in the Mormon temple, you can get married there, but anyone can get married there. And a Mormon marriage is no better than any other marriage. And by the way, if you choose to not get married, but you love each other and are respectful to each other, that's great too. Like, I would do some cleaning up upstream.
Yeah.
So I guess that would make it so, yes, any same-sex couple could get married in the Mormon temple.
Yeah, I really like that.
Along with any other couple.
So you're kind of getting rid of temple marriage in general. The idea that if you don't get married in the temple, you can't be with your spouse or your family.
Yeah, getting married in the temple is fine, but claiming that only a Mormon marriage Mormon temple is legitimate in the eyes of God is deeply offensive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's horrible. I mean, and then, but then temple work is its own problem.
I was just going to get to that. So
Okay.
I'm so glad that you continue.
Yeah. Like just this idea, like Joseph Smith reads some passage in the New Testament about like baptisms for the dead. And he's like, what does that mean? Oh, I know what it means. It means that everybody needs a Mormon baptism. And if they didn't get it while they're alive, then we'll get it when you're dead. And so the fact that Mormons, Mormon youth, Mormon adults spend hours each week, an aggregate of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of hours each week or each year, going to Mormon temples to get baptized in the name of some person in China and some person in Mexico, because God requires that the billions and billions and billions of people who have lived on this planet since the beginning of time all need a Mormon baptism to be able to go to heaven.
Yeah.
Like what a uncreative, ridiculously Pharisaical God to require, instead of like all the Mormons who have extra time and money on their hands, like teaching literacy to people who can't read, cleaning up the water, getting clean water to pueblos and towns that need clean water, like fighting abuse of children, like fighting poverty and war, instead of all the human hours that could be spent actually turning this problematic planet into a healthier, happier place for its citizens, its members are going to spend their leisure time, their free time, going to the local temple and getting baptized 20, 30, 50 times for Jose and Maria.
Who didn't ask for it.
Who didn't ask for it. Or Holocaust survivors. Like, how offensive is that? Baptizing Holocaust victims, Mormon, because there's an assumption that these people who died for their faith are going to somehow want to be Mormon in the afterlife. So we've got to get their baptisms. I mean, how insulting, but also what a phenomenal, catastrophic waste of time and energy and resources to be spending a third of our time as Mormons doing these stupid, and it's super rude, but it's outrageous when you think about poverty, war, and injustice on this planet, that's how money and time is being spent.
Right.
So I'm getting rid of all the proxy work for the dead. As Mormon prophet, I'm getting rid of all proxy work for the dead.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I actually talked about it with my mom in one of our episodes where she was saying, yeah, I tried to go to the temple, and if I didn't go to the temple, I felt guilty. But every single time I went, she has 3 kids, she was just stressed the whole time. Like, are my kids okay? What if they're trying to reach me? Busy doing temple work instead of actually being the parent that she's wanting to be, because all of her time is going towards this. And for what? And I mean, credit to these members and everything that we say. This is a little caveat disclaimer here. Everything that we're talking about, this is not a direct attack on the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We love them. We respect them. We just want them to be healthy and happy. And so when we talk about this temple work thing, we know that you're doing it with the best of intentions, and you're doing it hoping that the person that you're baptizing is getting something special in heaven because of your time and effort and sacrifice. So just wanted to throw that out there. But yes, I agree with you, John. Also, what kind of God would expect? How many active Mormons are there? Like 6 million, 4 million, to do the work of billions of people who have passed away and will continue to be born. And I'm telling you, I had my records removed. If someone tries to baptize me when I'm dead, I will haunt you. I do not want it. These people didn't ask for it. They don't want it. Yeah. Spend your time doing other things. Be with your families.
Well, there's just so much pain and suffering in the world, so many problems that like Jesus, even if you don't believe in Jesus, or if you do, like Jesus said, take no thought for the morrow, for the evil of today is sufficient. Something like that. I think Jesus said something like that. It's basic Buddhism 101. It's like, be in the present moment.
Yeah.
There's so much need and pain and suffering all around you. The Mormon Church could take all its time, money, and resources and just focus on all the need currently in the earth today, and it could never meet all the needs. So why focus on the past and the future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And just the same as the church didn't allow Black people to hold the priesthood and go to the temple and changed it, do you think in the future they will have to or be forced to or go under accept and allow LGBTQ marriages in the temple?
Yeah, probably 30 or 40 years from now. But I mean, it will by that point, it will be a totally different church. Like it's a dying church now.
Yeah.
It'll really be a dying church then. Because at that point,
there's nothing, no original doctrine.
Yeah,
will be.
it will cease to be the church that it started to be, and people won't. And that's the thing. I've tried to create secular community after leaving Mormonism because I had such a great experience as a Mormon, and I really love community. And I see one of the biggest needs for people leaving cults, leaving high demand religions, finding friends and community, because they're usually ostracized from their families and their community. Like I've tried to create community, and it turns out that exclusive truth claims, shame, and, threats or promises for the afterlife are really powerful motivators for creating community.
Right.
Right. But as soon as you take away the exclusive truth claims, the prophetic connections to a deity, allegedly, and then all the shame and the guilt and all that stuff, as soon as you neuter the church, people are going to show up and set up chairs and give 10% of their income and spend 2 years of their lives volunteering to paying to be, Mormon missionaries pay to be a 2-year salesperson for the Mormon Church. That's
brilliant, Mark.
Super
How
brilliant.
Did they come up with this?
but the way they came up with it is by having guilt, shame, exclusive truth claims, claiming to be the voice, literally the voices of God and Jesus. That's the secret sauce that binds people's eternal commitments to the church. So once you lose that, the church is going to just be in free fall. It's kind of already in free fall. It's going to even be worse in free fall.
Yeah. If you were the prophet, would you do away with missionaries?
I mean, I loved my mission. Like
Did you?
I had an psychologically abusive mission president. And I was, like the cause of what we were doing was deeply problematic for all the reasons we've already mentioned. We're basically teaching a whitewashed, overly simplified version of Mormon doctrine and history to culturally colonize, Latin Americans in my case. Like there's a million things that are wrong with that. But I do think that for people in poverty, being connected to a super wealthy $1 trillion organization in another country where you get relational opportunities, educational opportunities, even financial opportunities, how can that not be beneficial to at least some of the people that join the church? So I did see people's quality of life, socioeconomic status improve as a result of joining the church. So that's good. But just more importantly, I learned leadership. I learned communication skills. I learned self-motivation. I learned discipline. I learned to work hard and to face rejection. And just, I got a cultural experience where I learned a second language and spent 2 years of my life trying to be in the service of other people. What's not amazing about all of that? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So there's a big part of me that wishes my kids would have had that opportunity. Unfortunately, the church kicked me out before my kids were ever of mission age. I guess I should say fortunately, not unfortunately, for different reasons. But I mean, well, suffice it to say, I still believe in the mission experience, just being a missionary for actual truth and actual injustice and poverty. So I wouldn't get rid of the missionary program, but I would find a way to retool it so that when the missionaries are going to serve their mission, they're actually addressing poverty, war, and injustice and not enriching an already grossly wealthy organization that's a business masquerading as a church these days. Is that too harsh?
No.
Did I go too far?
No.
Okay.
I didn't think you went too far.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay. I do think that would be a positive thing because there are service missions in other churches that are vastly helpful. So maybe we just shift, instead of trying to bring people into this church under false pretenses and not giving them all the information, maybe the mission field is going out and building buildings for people, building schools, helping with food, building agriculture structures, anything that you can do to actually help the person instead of say, you have to join our church or you won't be with your family and give us your money.
Yeah. Yeah. And don't masturbate or we're going to make you feel like you're a horrible person. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the bones are there, but it does need to drastically shift and change and give the missionaries more support, to give them access to psychological help if they need it, because so many missionaries come home depressed and they're just told to, pull your boots up and go do God's work, and they're struggling and they don't have any resources. So beefing that side up a bit and then beefing up the side of the actual service, I think would be really beneficial.
You should be the next prophet, not me.
Oh my
Shelise.
goodness.
Yeah.
Sure, the first woman prophet.
I'm in. I'd vote for you. Wait, is that how prophets work? I'd vote for you.
Will you sustain me? Thank you. Thanks, John. Okay, so
all in favor?
All in favor.
Manifest by the like sign.
Everyone in the room. So
any post?
It's official.
Any post? Okay, you're in.
Perfect. Yeah, I think we'd be a great team. So I kind of hijacked your list. Are there any more that you want to go over?
Oh boy, wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, I could go on forever. I do think that another huge source of pain and suffering and family destruction that the Mormon Church has caused is by tearing lives and families apart when people lose their faith. Unless you've got familial or social or monetary forces causing your confirmation bias and motivated reasoning to be firing on all cylinders, which is every Orthodox Mormon in existence. Unless you've got that, if anyone just steps aside from that and neutrally and objectively looks at the Mormon Church's truth claims, it's obviously a fraud. It's obviously, Joseph Smith was obviously a charlatan who was also a sexual predator. There's literally zero possible interpretations if you look at the evidence objectively. And I know I'm using very strong words. I've been doing this 20 plus years. I stand by what I just said. Now, that doesn't mean super brilliant people don't find a way to still believe. We've still got Patrick Mason and Richard Bushman and Terrell and Fiona Givens and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of really smart Mormons who still believe. But again, my argument is it's because of social pressure. It's because of monetary pressure. It's because of familial pressure. And they would be deeply offended at this assertion, but I stand by it. And so, and there might be psychological binding forces too, like real vulnerabilities that just lead them to feel like they need a high demand religion or they need Mormonism to kind of keep their psychological wheels on the wagon. But I think those four things account for 90% of devout Orthodox Mormonism in the face of the evidence. I mean, there's a whole chunk of Mormons that if they could just see the evidence, they'd walk away today.
Right.
But because they live in such a bubble, a protected bubble where the church, puts the fear of Heavenly Father into them that they not learn the truth about the church, they're never going to learn it.
Right.
Right.
It's too scary.
Yeah. And they've been threatened and made, to fear it. So anyway, what I'm saying is that the church has made it horrific for people who start to question the church. And when you start to question Mormonism, you potentially can lose your spouse. You can lose the love and esteem of your parents. You can lose the love and esteem of your children. You can be disinherited by your parents or your grandparents. You can lose your job. You can lose your friends. You can lose your community. And I like to say that you could literally win the Nobel Peace Prize and cure cancer. But if you leave the Mormon Church, you would be viewed as a disappointment by your parents. And I'm not exaggerating, fact. And so the amount of carnage, individual carnage, depression, anxiety, suicidality over just losing your faith in Mormonism, or the amount of divorces, family destruction, family division is infinite. It's incalculable. And so the Mormon Church has been horrific at punishing people who lose their faith. And I learned many, many years ago, one definition of a cult, maybe you've heard this, is any institution that won't let you leave with your dignity intact.
Right.
And there's no way to leave Mormonism with your dignity intact. We all know the tropes and the stereotypes that Orthodox Mormons put on anyone who's lost their faith. Pop quiz, Shelise. What are some of the tropes of why people leave the church?
Oh, why people leave the church?
Why did
they
you
just left because they wanted to sin.
They wanted to sin. You wanted to drink beer, right?
Or they left because they were offended.
They were offended,
or
right?
they left because they never really had a testimony.
Exactly. They never had a testimony to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Or they looked at porn, right? Or they, wanted to have sex.
Or the most dangerous one, they left because they were led by Satan.
Yeah.
How's that for a judgment?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So these are all just a subset of the total number of tropes or stereotypes that Orthodox Mormons put on people who leave the church as a way to protect their own faith. Because they certainly can't go, well, Shelise left because she was horribly mistreated by her leaders and shamed by the community and experienced all sorts of horrific abuse and is intelligent and emotionally and psychologically mature and realized that this was problematic and discriminatory and harmful for innumerable classes of marginalized groups. And so she gained her power by being intelligent and gained her strength by extricating herself from a very difficult, organization to extricate yourself from, paid a huge price, followed the hero's journey, and became a strong, empowered, healthy woman. Said no Orthodox Mormon ever about you, right? Right, Shelise? Like, that's not the narrative.
I don't think so, sadly.
They found their power and wisdom and left the church. Has that ever been said ever?
I don't think so.
No, it's never said. So the church needs to just say to all the membership, there are lots of reasonable reasons to leave the Mormon Church. And it's okay to believe it if you want to, but lots of people leave for lots of good reasons, and they are to be loved and maybe even respected a little bit more for leaving, simply because it's such a difficult, painful, excruciating, and courageous act to leave any high demand religion, but especially to leave the Mormon Church. So the church needs to just completely change its narrative, and it needs to tell spouses, parents, children, siblings, friends, community members, you need to love extra people who leave the Mormon Church because they need your love more. And by the way, ask them why they left, show real empathy, and learn about why they left, because that will help you gain the informed consent that we never had the courage or the respect to offer you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got me ranty. I think I had too much coffee this morning.
It's great.
This is Caffeinated John. You were able to extricate Caffeinated John from...
I am honored that I am experiencing Caffeinated John, and so are our listeners. I think the issue is it's not just passive. They actively teach people to create this us versus them mentality. They actively teach people, oh, they're just lazy learners. Oh, they just never were faithful enough. Oh, we're separating the sheep. They sent letters home to people during COVID saying people will fall away, but the strong ones will stay. They are actively manipulating people into thinking, oh, well, yeah, I am better than that person. Oh, yeah, I do have a right to judge them and say bad things about them. And that's just, it's people's own family are saying that. And that's what's so difficult. It's not just them thinking, oh, well, just a random person out there left the church and I'm angry or I'm judging them. It's I'm judging my brother. I'm judging my sister. I'm judging my mother. And it just tears families apart. It doesn't help anyone.
You're starting to get the feels.
I'm getting all the feels. I have big opinions, John.
Have you shed a tear on your podcast yet? I
have, yeah.
You have?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah, good times.
Well, that's good. You're emotionally and psychologically connected because the pain is real. Like, I talk about it passionately, but the degree to which people have been shut off, shunned, cut off from marriages, from their own children, from their own parents, it's its own set of travesties that is outrageous. And it's there's so much carnage with the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, that this is like fourth on the list of like severity, but it's real and it's significant.
Yeah. Anything else on the list?
We're still going? Okay. Well, if our viewers and listeners aren't tired yet, I'll say two more things.
Okay.
The next one is sexual shame and purity culture.
Yes.
Like, I realized in the past few years that sexual shame is literally like the secret. You know how Coca-Cola has like a secret ingredient allegedly that kind of makes Coca-Cola like supposedly better than all the other colas? Like, Mormonism's secret ingredient is sexual shame, because the basic premise of Christianity, no offense, Christians. Okay, I'll say this. The basic premise of Mormon Christianity and of certain other forms of Christianity is that we're all broken. We're all fallen. We're all despicable, worthless, dirty, evil creatures.
The natural man.
Yeah, the natural man.
Yeah.
This is basic Calvinist Christianity, that because we're broken and fallen and despicable, then we need a savior to be punished and die for our sins to make up as like a righteous lamb to the slaughter for all of our horrific evil that's in our core nature. Now, of course, this is fundamentally flawed from the start because we're God's creation. Mm-hmm. So if God literally created us to be despicable, deplorable, treacherous wretches of humanity, then why did God make us this way and then have to punish and kill his own child to then atone for or make up for our wretchedness that he created? Mm-hmm. Like, that's just effed up to begin with, not to mention that someone innocent is going to suffer and die. Like, that's just like, if Mormon Heavenly Father were an actual parent, he would be put in prison for child abuse and neglect, right?
Yeah.
Like, that'd be torturous.
Yeah.
To hold that over your children. Like, I made you a horrific person, so now I'm going to go kill someone else who's innocent so that then you can forever feel indebted to me or to that dead person. And so that you'll do everything I say for the rest of your life. You owe me and you're indentured to me and this other dead person for the rest of your life because I made you a deplorable to begin with. But that's the premise of Mormon Christianity.
Yeah.
And so sexual shame is you got to pick a sin that's like pervasive, right? You can't pick like, I don't know, stealing.
Yeah.
As like the core thing.
Because not everyone steals.
Yeah, because like a ton of people don't steal.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's a minority that's like really into stealing.
Yeah.
So you got to go bigger. You got to pick a sin that's like way more pervasive. What's more pervasive than like sex? I mean, water drinking, maybe, eating. Like, you got to pick something that like, you won't die if you stop for a while.
Yeah.
But that you're going to do
eventually.
But you're going to do it at least frequently enough to where you can get on that shame treadmill for the rest of your life. So they couldn't do sleep. They couldn't do food. They couldn't do water, right? They couldn't do breathing. So like, what's like one level up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Sex.
Yeah.
Or sexual stimulation or gratification. And that's literally what they've locked themselves onto. So from the point that you're like 8 years old and exploring yourself, or you're a 4-year-old girl getting a dress, it's like, well, don't have a sleeveless dress because you're showing your shoulders as a 4-year-old girl and you're going to make some weird perverted man have bad thoughts.
And
so
that's on you.
Little girls, make sure you dress modestly, make sure your skirt's long so that some man doesn't have a bad thought. And so girls are carrying already, before they're even going through puberty, they're already carrying men's sexual, problems on their shoulders.
Yeah.
And then youth, as soon as they start to have sexual awakenings, whether it's prepubescent or, of course, when the hormones start raging in adolescence, as soon as you touch yourself, as soon as you touch someone else's private parts, as soon as you do what is by any other standard would be completely healthy, which is to understand, come to know your own sexuality, and then start to gain proper sexual education such that you can explore in healthy ways sexually, in a healthy way.
Yeah.
All that's shut down. You're not given any education, and you're just shamed and made to feel horrific about ever touching yourself, about ever touching somebody else, about ever having a thought, even having a sexual thought. Heaven forbid. Like talk about pervasiveness. Who hasn't had a sexual thought? But that's, in Mormonism, like having the sexual thought, committing adultery in your mind is like one step away from actually committing adultery. Not to mention committing a sexual transgression is like next to what?
Next to murder.
Sin next to murder. So you just amp up the guilt and shame on a sin that's literally prolific, universal, a behavior or thoughts or feelings that are literally universal. We're literally wired as mammals to have these thoughts and feelings and to procreate. So let's harness that onto the shame cycle, and let's use it to make all the Mormons feel infinitely shameful about themselves and indebted to the church as the only way that they're going to ever be rescued from this horrible sin and transgression and carnality that they're wallowing in, that of course God made them to wallow in, but that's, not mentioned. And so, yeah. So whether it's modesty culture, rape culture, whether it's the law of chastity, prohibiting masturbation, not giving proper sex education, and then, virginity culture that then leads to people getting married way too young without the education, marrying people they probably have no business marrying at an age way too young, and then sort of saddling young married couples with literally a lifetime of sexual dysfunction. And then all the pornography, guilt, and shame that's plugged into all those different channels. Surprise, surprise, Mormons, by some accounts, lead the nation in pornography use per capita, sexual abuse of children per capita.
Yeah.
Like, just so much sexual dysfunction within Mormonism. And that's what you get when you have a culture where healthy sexuality is never taught, and then it's demonized and pathologized in every single possible way. And so the Mormon Church needs to throw out its law of chastity. It needs to throw out its purity culture, throw out its modesty standards. And by the way, that doesn't mean just like don't teach. What it does mean is teach proper sex education, like the Unitarian Universalists, like the Our Whole Lives curriculum that the Unitarian Universalist Church teaches its youth. It means teaching consent. It means teaching sex ed, sexual health, what is rape, what is assault, what is abuse, what is consent, what is healthy sexuality, what is respect, what is self-respect, self-knowledge, other knowledge. Teach all that, and then nurture. You're probably going to get less. You're probably going to get less unhealthy sexual exploration if you do that. You'll probably have less unwanted pregnancies, less abortions, and just happy, healthier lives and happy, healthier marriages. But you can't get it all rid of that because it's core to your business model. It's core to your shame model that then keeps everybody bound to your church. So that's why the church doesn't do what I would do if they let me.
That's why they will never make you profit. Yeah, this is definitely one of my biggest problems with the church and why I have so many episodes on it. We did 2 episodes with Natasha, and they were just incredible. She was talking about things that should be normal, that should not be shamed. And it's so important that youth and adults have this information because it can change your life and it can help you realize, oh, I am human. I'm not something that's dirty and sinful and gross, and the whole purity thing and the chastity thing and the virtue thing and all those disgusting virtue lessons that it just gets me so angry. The licked cupcake, the chewed gum. You're teaching women that, this is an object lesson. You are the object. We are thinking of you women as objects, and your only purpose as an object is to push out babies somehow after you've somehow figured out how to have babies. That's your only thing in life, and that's what you have to be focused on. But we're not going to tell you how to actually have babies. We're just going to tell you to not have them until you have to have all of them. It makes no sense. Yeah. So this is one of the, and again, like we're like 8 topics in, and this is one of the worst things about Mormonism, right? Isn't that amazing? Yeah. That we're like 8 topics in and we're still at something super pervasive and horrific. There's a lot to talk about.
You think the intensity would dial down as we get farther down the list? And I don't think this is a less intense issue. There are Mormon youth and even adults that die by suicide because of not being able to stop masturbating or not being able to stop looking at pornography. Like there are Mormon wives or husbands that view their pornography viewing spouses as despicable humans, right? Who are addicts, right? Who can't, quit their addictions of masturbating once every 3 weeks. That is a real this is tearing families and lives apart. It's carnage. It's social carnage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So viewers, if you want to learn more about is masturbation healthy, definitely check out Natasha Helfer. She goes into depth, and she has done so much research on how masturbation is a very healthy and normative behavior, even from infancy. So go check that out. Anything else, John?
Well, I mean, I'll just give like the miscellaneous. There are a few more that are huge that I kind of made reference to, like the fact that Mormon ordinances are tied to tithe paying. So like the church has a huge problem with money. Let's just group it in the money problem. So number one, they're not transparent in their finances. They used to be. In the late 1950s, the church was still transparent in its finances. But at some point it wanted to deficit spend and get into a bunch of debt. So in the late 1950s, early 1960s, the church made its finances private and then started spending a boatload of money that it didn't have, building chapels all over the world and building temples. And it turned out well financially for the church. But since then, the church has been completely non-transparent. Like I run a 501c3 nonprofit. I publish my finances every single year in a 990 that I file with the federal government. Why? Because the federal government says, look, if you're going to get a tax break, then you need to be transparent in your finances so that people don't know. So people know if you're defrauding them, and so that there's basic transparency into how you spend your money because it's a public service. So why in the holy heck would nonprofits be required to be transparent in their finances, but religions aren't?
Yeah.
Like religions are nonprofits. And why should religions have an exclusion for being transparent in their finances? So I would make the Mormon Church be transparent in its finances, which would reveal that it's $1 trillion multinational mega corporation that doesn't need anyone's money.
That doesn't need missionaries to pay to work for them.
No, like there's a gazillion things that members don't need to be putting up their time and money for. But that's the first problem, that the church, until it was exposed as having $120 billion of stocks and bonds and real estate and cash and municipalities and until it was exposed as having secret assets approaching $500 billion, the church was keeping all that secret from its members.
Yeah.
So that would change. And then the church would stop requiring 10% of its membership, especially if it's poor people.
Yeah.
Like if the rich people want to pay 10%, but like
optional.
Why are Panamanians and Filipinos told in the Mormon Church that they should pay their tithing before they buy shoes for themselves? And I'm not making that up.
Wow.
There's a tithing video that I released recently that basically is all the instances of Mormon Church leaders telling people, poor people in developing countries, to pay their tithing before they buy food or shoes. Wow. I am not exaggerating. So that's horrific. And then 10% is a lot of money. And then also what the Mormon Church has done that's even more diabolical is that they've tied these most sacred Mormon temple rituals that we've already kind of denounced in this episode. They've tied Mormon marriage, the ability to attend a Mormon wedding, to your paying of your 10% of your income. So if I'm a Mormon dad and I have a 20-year-old daughter and she goes to BYU and I lose my faith, so I don't want to pay tithing anymore, but then my 20-year-old daughter still at BYU, she finds her returned missionary, they decide to get married and I'm not paying my tithing, as a parent who raised this child, is not allowed to attend the wedding of my own child. In 2022, in modern Mormonism, non-believing, non-tithe-paying Mormon parents are excluded from the weddings of their own children.
Yeah.
Not making this up. And it's not just weddings, it's attending endowment ceremonies, sealings, all sorts of these most sacred Mormon family events. Sort of entrance into the temple is viewed by Orthodox Mormons as worthiness. It means you're not cheating on your spouse. It means you're not looking at porn. It means you're obeying all the commandments. So what's the inverse of that? If you're excluded from a Mormon temple, what does every Orthodox Mormon assume about you?
That you're doing all of those things, that you're a sinner, that you're not worthy enough, you're doing something wrong.
Cheating on your spouse, that you're looking at porn.
Just assume the worst.
Yeah, so not only are you excluded from the most sacred holy or important familial ordinances within the church, but you're shamed by the entire set of family members and general membership. You're shamed because these whisper campaigns go around about why was he kept from the temple? Because obviously the church isn't going to go, it's because he didn't give us 10%. So we're keeping him out of the temple. They just keep it ambiguous. So that leaves all the members to assume that you're not attending the temple because you're addicted to porn and cheating on your spouse.
Or it could be something as simple as drinking coffee.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or having a shot on the weekend.
How outrageous is that? That if I drink coffee in 2022, I'm not allowed to attend my own son's wedding in a Mormon temple.
Or you could just lie about it and then feel guilty.
Yeah, exactly. Sounds like did you do that one time? No, you never did that. Okay.
No, okay. I was honest and I missed both my best friend's weddings.
Yeah.
So there's that.
But the Mormon Church does have a culture of teaching and encouraging dishonesty by forcing members to lie so that they're not shamed and excluded from their most holy ordinances. So I would change that whole tying, 10% of your income to these most sacred, holy temple rituals, because it really is, it's an indulgence, it's extortion, it's pay for play, it's just unethical on every possible level, not to mention taking advantage of the poor and causing all these people to pay money when the church doesn't need it. Like literally, you take $150 billion that the church has right now, 7% interest on $150 billion easily pays the $8 or $9 billion annual budget that the church has. The Mormon Church does not need your money. I don't care who you are. In 2022 or beyond, the Mormon Church is it's at least a $500 billion church. That's, if not already a $1 trillion church, it will be in the next 7 years. So the Mormon Church doesn't need your money. Keep your money, give it to worthy charitable causes or to your own family or friends in need. Don't give the Mormon Church your money. So,
Amen.
Yeah. So that takes care of financial transparency, requiring 10% tithing and tying temple work to people giving the church money. I mean, that's
quite the list, and there's probably more, and we could go on for 10 hours.
Yeah.
So, if John Dehlin or the prophet of the Mormon Church or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, these are all the things that we would want to change and implement so you as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints can live a happier, healthier, more well-rounded, better life and raise your children in something that you're really proud of and something that will help them become productive members of society and happy and healthy and all the things that you want for your children.
You're so good at this.
Oh, thanks, John.
Have you been doing this a year? Like, how long have you been doing this? Like 3 months? Like, how long?
My podcast has been going for 5 months.
You are freaking amazing, Shelise. Wow. Seriously.
That is high praise, John. Thank you.
No, you do. You're good. She's good. Jonathan, she's no slouch. Yeah.
All right. So, John, before we go, I just have so many questions that I want to ask John Dehlin here because, I've been following your podcast for a while, and here's just a few, and let's just see how many we can get through. What are the most shocking things that you've ever heard in your interviews?
Wow.
Things that have really stood out to you.
Yeah. I mean, we've covered, like, if people are kind of like, John, you're off the chain, like you're overly exuberant, you're angry, you're like way too passionate. What people need to understand is that my passion comes from spending 20 years, 2 decades swimming in these waters.
Yeah.
So I know parents who have lost their children to death by suicide. I have close family and friends who have been suicidal because of their LGBTQ nature. I've seen marriages torn apart, and I've seen grandparents estranged from their own grandkids. And, I've seen so much horrific stuff. I've seen people, I've seen wives shame their husbands into sleeping on the sofa or kicking them out of the house because they masturbated once every 3 weeks. And then the kids being estranged from their parents. Like, I've seen so much horrific carnage that when I am perceived to be angry or overly passionate, it's because I have corresponded with tens of thousands of Mormons who have lived this carnage that you and I have been now talking about for the past, I don't know, hour and a half. So that's where my passion comes from. Mm-hmm. So having said that, all this stuff that we've been talking about, I've seen in excess. So having said that, what are some interesting things on Mormon Stories podcast? One of the most shocking things that I learned on Mormon Stories podcast was about the second anointing. Have you covered that yet?
I learned it from you.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Have you covered it on your podcast yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Yeah. So like, it's always crazy when you've been a Mormon your whole life for decades, going to BYU, going to gazillion hours of church, learning everything you can, and then you learn something completely new that's incredibly shocking and even revolting that was kept from you. And the second anointing is just that. So Orthodox Mormons or never Mormons, if you don't know, there's a super secret temple ordinance called the second anointing, which has been around since the time of Joseph Smith. And it's basically how it happens is you're called, by your stake president, by one of your church leaders, and they say, you and your spouse show up at the temple on a Sunday morning at 8 a.m. and don't tell anyone you're coming. Literally lie to your friends and family if they ask you where you're going. Keep it from them. Show up at the Mormon temple, and something very special is going to happen. So you show up, and you're there with like 5 or 6 other couples, and a Mormon apostle shows up. Now, in Mormonism, a Mormon apostle is viewed as a special witness of Christ. And Mormons are taught culturally to believe that the first presidency and the quorum of the 12 apostles, the 15 men that run the Mormon Church, are all special witnesses of Christ, which means they talk to Christ.
Right, directly.
They've met Christ, they've spoken to Christ, and that's what we're all led to believe. So this person who knows Jesus on a personal level, one of the top 15 leaders of the church, is there, meets you at the temple, invites you in, and basically performs this holy ordinance for and with you and your spouse, basically promising you that you are going to become a God someday. You have arrived. You are not only going to make it to heaven, you're making it to the celestial kingdom, and not just the celestial kingdom, which is the third highest tier of heaven, but you're making it to the highest level of the celestial kingdom, which is the third tier in the third tier, where you're going to become exalted and be made a god and a goddess to rule over your own Mormon planet or planets someday. And so they do what's called the second anointing. And they basically anoint you and your spouse with oil. I guess they put oil on your head, and they anoint you with hand. I'm a little rusty, your feet? But they also wash your feet. Mm-hmm. The apostle, the representative of Jesus, washes your feet.
He does
it. I don't, I'm rusty on the details, but there's feet washing involved. And eventually I think the wife and the husband retreat into a room where the wife washes the feet of the husband.
Yeah, that
right?
checks out. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm pretty sure the apostle washes the feet of the couple.
Man.
I think. You guys can go look it up.
Yeah.
Tell me I'm wrong. I don't care. Enough of what I've said is right.
Yeah.
That I'll stand by it. And the point I'm making is that, why is this horrific? Well, number one, it's horrific because it's a super sacred ordinance that has been withheld from the general membership for over a century. But number two, it turns out that it's this elite privileged ordinance where, like, once you get the second anointing, then like your leaders ask you, hey, it's almost like a multi-level marketing scam. It's like, well, who do you recommend that you think should also be? And it's normally wealthy grandparents that have given a crap ton of money to the church, and then their children, and it's basically like, if you have committed enough of your lives, if you're wealthy enough, if you're powerful enough, if we want to make sure you never leave, and we want to reward you for all the time and money and reputation that you've given to the church, we're going to give you this super secret elite ordinance and promise you literally, and this is the other shocking part, that the only thing you can do to disqualify yourself from exaltation, from becoming a god, is what, Shelise?
Is it murder?
It's murder.
I'm surprised it's not sexual sin.
No. So literally by the rules of the second anointing, you can be a pedophile or a rapist
and still make it to the top.
Absolutely. What do you think it does to the psychology of a human to tell them they're basically
superiority complex,
can do no wrong as long as you don't murder, you're good. Like the horrible things on this earth. Just think of Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow. They believed that they were gods. They believed that they were invincible. So they kill their spouses and children thinking there's going to be no consequence because they've got God's power on their side. Like, trust me, I have a psychology background. Once you start telling humans they're invincible, horrible, horrific things happen. And so, promising these wealthy elite Mormons that because they've got the right parents or grandparents, because they know the right people, because they gave enough money, that they're going to be gods someday, and there's nothing they could do in the remaining years of their life to disqualify themselves. It's just horrific on 15 different levels. And then that it's withheld. A school teacher who's just a humble school teacher that never is wealthy, that isn't connected to some apostle. School teachers and traditional housewives or husbands or whatever, they're never going to get access to this ordinance. It's only if like your grandparents are apostles or your parents are super wealthy. Only the elite are gonna even get access to this ordinance. So I don't know. Is that horrific? Like for some people,
I think that's definitely shocking. When I first heard it on your channel, I was like, wait, what? There's like a super secret club in Mormonism? I thought Mormonism's already a super secret club. And I got like all this.
Well, that's one of the definitions of it's one of the criteria of a cult.
Yeah.
Is when there's secret levels where the more you advance within the high demand religion or cult, the more you learn.
Right.
But that super secret troubling stuff, like the branding of Sarah Edmondson within NXIVM, right? Like all that super secret stuff that's most shocking and troubling is withheld
until you
from
get to
the
the
low
top.
rank, from the low rank members.
Yeah.
That's like, other than like getting your own name, like there are a few things where if it's happening to you, you're freaking in a cult. One is if you're being given a new name by your organization, and another is if there's super secret rituals where you're not told about them at the beginning, but you're told about them as you advance in money and power. Like those are two sure signs of a cult.
Yeah. They take away your identity, give you a new identity, and then tell you not to tell anyone.
Yep. That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one.
Yeah.
Second anointing.
That's a good one.
Is that all right?
A good one.
Is that good?
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other things that come to mind, or should we move to the next question?
Of other shocking things?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it was shocking to learn that the Mormon Church participated in electroshock therapy of LGBT students at BYU, where basically they were, shown erotic gay porn as BYU students, and then were shocked. Some say shocked on their genitals.
Yeah.
Whenever they got aroused.
Right.
And it was a form of aversion therapy, which is different than conversion therapy.
Oh.
It was a form of aversion therapy, thinking that like rats, if you administered the right operant conditioning, you could de-gayify somebody through aversive stimuli. And basically it just drove these young gay BYU students mad and made many of them want to kill themselves. And the Mormon Church, not only did the Mormon Church participate in that at BYU in the 70s, but the current number 2 leader in the Mormon Church, Dallin H. Oaks, who is next in line to be the prophet, he was the president of BYU who approved those experiments. Mm-hmm. It's a little shocking.
Literally shocking. And I heard about that too. I think they actually released a documentary of some of these men who had to go through this. And I haven't watched it myself yet. They covered it on Not Somali Mormon podcast. And they even mentioned one where they inject something into their veins that makes them nauseous and throw up, and then make them watch porn. So, it's so frustrating and sad that people had to go through this.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I'm harder on the Mormon Church than maybe other organizations is because it's one thing to do harm. Like, if you just look at the general medical industry or even the field of psychiatry, you go back into the 40s and 50s, they were like performing lobotomies on people indiscriminately. And this isn't Mormonism. This is just like, oh, we think lobotomies will help cure, bipolar.
Yeah.
And so they're like literally like separating the corpus callosum with a knife and scrambling parts of people's brains
With an ice
just
pick.
like, yeah, exactly through the nose or the eye socket with the ice pick, like horrific stuff, just kind of like trying shit out to help people who are like not doing so well. Like, so like modern medicine or modern psychiatry has a really horrific track record and a good track record of like doing experiments to try and figure things out. Like, okay, we're going to cut humanity some slack for making some errors along the way. I can do that. I can hold a space of empathy and understanding for the fact that, 200 years ago, we thought spirits were evil spirits were what caused depression. Like we didn't know, we're making stuff up.
Yeah.
So like I can have a place in my heart of empathy for social science or science gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What's different about Mormonism is the Mormon Church gains its power by telling people it's led by God and Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one thing to say, I'm a medical doctor doing my best to like help people. So I'm going to perform some experiments to see if this helps. Like, yeah, there are unethical and ethical ways to do that, but you're going to cut those people slack. When you're performing electroshock therapy on gay Mormon men on their genitals, saying that you represent Jesus and God, and that God and Jesus, in effect, approve of this experiment, or even in a less benign way, God and Jesus told me, the Mormon prophet, that your gay lifestyle is next to bestiality and pedophilia in terms of evil.
Yeah.
And you're telling them that it's God and Jesus who believe that? That's a whole order of magnitude level more severe, more abusive, and more damaging. So yeah, I expect more of the Mormon Church because their power and their wealth is tied to convincing people that everything they do is from the lips of God and Jesus. And I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah. You have spiritual abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse,
Sexual abuse,
all under the guise of this is what God wants for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a second shocking thing.
Wow.
Should we keep going?
Do you have another one?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Are you kidding?
Lay them on me, John.
So I did this whole series called Losing the Lamanites.
Okay.
Which was so obviously we've already talked about one of the most horrific doctrines of Mormonism, which is that Native Americans, I mean, this is shocking, but this isn't the shocking thing.
Yeah.
This is the foundation of the shocking thing. So there's this thing called the Mound Builder myth, which was this belief in the 1700s in America that like, whoa, we're finding all these really cool civilizations, remnants of really sophisticated civilizations. And I'm using the language of white
Their words.
19th century America. But clearly these savages, these dark, savages they're not intelligent enough. They're not sophisticated enough to have been able to develop this agriculture and art in these major civilizations. There must have been a white race that lived here in America that built all these amazing techniques and civilizations that were then killed off. I mean, obviously, dark civilizations couldn't have done this amazing stuff. So clearly, these dark Native Americans that are all around us, who we're displacing and committing genocide towards, right? Clearly, they couldn't have done it. So they must have killed off this white race of people. So that was a thing. Like Thomas Jefferson, like Benjamin Franklin, if you go back to the 1700s in America, that was kind of a general understanding that somehow like the 12 tribes of Israel, some of the remnants, the Jews of the 12 tribes of Israel, somehow made their way over to America as white settlers, developed all these amazing civilizations, and somehow these dark civilizations killed off all the white people. And that's who the Puritans and the Pilgrims found when they came over, and the conquistadors when they came over and settled North America and Central and South America. So that's the mound builder myth, right? So clearly when Joseph Smith created the Book of Mormon, he needed a framework to tell the story of the Book of Mormon. So he literally like copies and pastes the mound builder myth into the Book of Mormon. So that's what I just told you is the central premise of Mormonism's holiest text, right? The Book of Mormon believes everything I just told you about dark-skinned and light-skinned Native Americans. And the dark-skinned, Lamanites killed off the white and delightsome Nephites.
And that's actual text, white and delightsome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dark and loathsome Lamanites, white and delightsome Nephites in Mormon scripture today, 2022, has not been removed. So this is the teaching of the Lamanites. So whenever any Native American or Latino or Pacific Islander joins the Mormon Church, they're taught that they are the descendants of the Lamanites, as if it's an honor, as if it's some great honor, because on the one hand, they're told they're the descendants of Israel, because obviously these Native Americans were the descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel somehow, and so they're the pure blood of Israel, so that's the good news. The bad news is your ancestors were made dark and loathsome so that you would be viewed as repulsive by the white Nephites who were killed off by your wicked ancestors. So that's the downside of being a Lamanite, right? So this idea of the Lamanite. So if you were joined the church or baptized in the church in Latin America or the Pacific Islanders, you were told you're not Apache, you're not Mayan, you're not Incan, you're not Tongan or Maori, you're a Lamanite, right? Your cultural identity is this Christian fan fiction, frontier American identity that Joseph Smith pulled out of his rear and slapped on the Book of Mormon. That's your actual cultural identity. Why are you laughing?
Because it's ridiculous.
It is. It's just erasing. It's so offensive.
Erasing the indigenous cultures.
Like if you don't cry or scream or shoot someone, you laugh.
You have to laugh.
You have to laugh. Yeah.
Because it's so awful.
Yeah, it's so awful. So anyway, like imagine generations of dark-skinned Mormons being taught that they're Lamanites. So you reach 20 teens, I'm doing Mormon stories, and I'm like, whoa. So like what happens when someone who's been taught their whole life that they're a Lamanite loses their faith in the Mormon Church, and all of a sudden they're like, whoa, I had this whole identity that I had assumed based on what the church taught me, that now I'm realizing I'm actually Incan or Mayan or Maori or Samoan. Like, what's that like? So I interviewed a bunch of ex-Mormon Native Americans or ex-Mormon Pacific Islanders about their experience. And definitely one of the most tragic things I experienced on Mormon Stories was hearing these people tell their story, because like Sarah, one of the people I interviewed, Sarah, she talked about growing up. She comes from kind of Alaska, Native American tribes kind of in the Pacific Northwest / Alaska. And Sarah talked about how there's this Mormon prophecy that if you were righteous enough, your skin would turn lighter. Yeah. That the more righteous you got, you and your descendants would become lighter skinned. And so she would, like, as an adolescent Mormon teen, she would be super righteous, and then look at her skin and see that it stayed dark. No. But then what was worse, there'd be like a church activity where they'd go swimming. So she would go out in a bathing suit, the sun would hit, and she would get even more tan. So she'd become even more dark. And for her, that was a sign that she was becoming more wicked instead of more righteous. So she talked about, like, in the summer, going out to like church activities, wearing long sleeves so that her skin wouldn't, and sunscreen and hats. Imagine you're at a lake or at the beach and you're covered up with long sleeve shirts and a hat and sunscreen because you're trying to defy the laws of physics and prevent your skin from getting naturally darker. And that was her teenage years, trying to fulfill Mormon prophecy of having her skin tone get lighter. There was also another Native American that we interviewed who used to rub lemon on her skin because she believed in some sort of folk wisdom that if you rubbed lemon on your skin, it would
bleach it.
It would bleach your skin and make it lighter. So like that's part of, the many horrific examples of the Mormon, quote, Lamanite experience.
That is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
What was the end of her story? When did she get out and how's she doing?
Oh, yeah. So,
what episode? And we'll link it right here.
Yeah. So, she is one of my favorite Mormon Stories interviews of all time. Her name is Sarah Newcomb.
Okay.
Sarah Newcomb, Newcomb. And I've interviewed her a few times, but either Google the Losing the Lamanites series or Sarah Newcomb.
Okay.
And you'll get some amazing, horrific, and inspiring stories.
Yeah. And I heard about the Native American placement program where they would take children off of these reservations, put them in Mormon homes. And who was it, one of the higher-ups in the church, that literally lined up the kids, took pictures, and was like, see, they're getting whiter.
Yeah, Spencer W. Kimball.
Ugh, friggin' Kimball. I could do without Kimball.
I know. And the miracle of forgiveness comes from him as well. Mm-hmm. The Indian placement program, is what it was called, was basically cultural colonization at its worst, where Mormons, white Mormon families, would take, Lamanite Native American Mormon parents would give their kids to white Mormon Utah and Idaho families in Arizona to be raised by white parents because they were taught that they had no business raising these kids, that if they were raised in white Mormon homes and attended, Indian schools where they could be assimilated properly into white American culture, that eventually they would become righteous and their curses would be reversed. And of course their skin would lighten over time. Like, I'm literally not making this up.
Yeah.
Google Indian placement program, and the Mormon Church and the Mormon prophets were behind this program. Yeah.
I think that was one of the most shocking things that I heard about the church just a couple years ago, where I thought, wait a second, I was supposed to believe that as a Mormon. I had no idea that was even a thing. So even after hearing all of these horrific stories, you've been doing this since 2005, you've interviewed thousands of people. What is it that makes you continue to want to do this work? What inspires you to continue on this path?
Oh, you mean we're going to stop with the horrific things?
Do you have more?
I'm kidding.
Keep going that
I just have to say that was a good segue, and I have more, but maybe we'll save it for my next interview with you.
Okay, part two.
Part two, yeah. Okay, so why do I do this work?
Yeah.
Why do I do this?
What inspires you to keep going after you hear all of these tragic stories? Yeah,
so I've been doing this work for 20 years. Like, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And you would think I had a hard time staying with one job. Like, even at Microsoft, I was there 7 years. I probably had 7 different jobs at Microsoft. Like, I probably could meet criteria for ADHD, and I've been doing this so long, it basically makes no sense that I'm still doing it. I think and this isn't a flex, it's just a fact. I think I have one of the longest running podcasts in the history of the world, because you won't find many, if any, podcasters that have been doing it since 2005.
Mm-hmm.
So why in the heck am I still doing it, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it's so heavy.
Yeah.
Right. And the truth is, like, I had the benefit of having careers for the first 15 years of my life that I wasn't passionate about. I thought about law school, but then I didn't know many lawyers that loved their jobs. I got into tech, which was fun, but was ultimately in many ways shallow and superficial. And it wasn't until I found Mormon Stories podcast and started learning about the lives of the people that Mormon Stories podcast influenced that I saw all this horrific carnage that we've been talking about for this entire episode. And as a result, I realized that this was an incredible opportunity to prevent divorce, to keep families from being destroyed, to prevent death by suicide, to improve people's mental health, to improve marriages, to alleviate anxiety and depression, to basically, it was this massive pool of suffering people who also, by the way, were universally deceived into these very damaging ways of life. I could be part of a small part, a decent part of their liberation from undue influence. And I could help prevent or heal the massive carnage that Mormons were experiencing within a Mormon context. So like, I don't think there's any bigger gift in life than to find a purpose or a cause that makes it so every single day, you literally never have to set your alarm clock. I do not set my alarm clock because somewhere between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., I wake up and say, I can't wait to get to work today. Like that's literally my life for the past 18 years. I don't have a job. I have a passion. I have a cause that now I happen to get paid for. And so like every day, if you get to wake up and say, I get to prevent a divorce today, I get to prevent a suicide today, I get to heal a family today, I get to alleviate depression and anxiety, I get to do things that would make people want to stop me on the street and say, hey, thanks for helping me out. That's like the Holy Grail. Like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table sought the Holy Grail. I found it. The Holy Grail, little safety tip, a little secret life tip. The Holy Grail of the human experience is finding a cause where you can alleviate suffering and promote joy to as many people as possible. You'll never work another day in your life, and you'll have more meaning and fulfillment and joy and satisfaction than I think you could get in almost any other venue. Like, next to my marriage and my children, this is the most sacred work I will ever do. And so I don't understand your question. No, I'm kidding.
No, that really is beautiful. And even though you aren't the prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you really are affecting change from the inside out. You are exposing truths. You are educating people who don't know the true history of the church. And even bigger than that, I think just having on regular people helps other people say, oh, I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only one who's felt that way. I'm not the only one who's had that said to me by a bishop. Or I thought that what I was feeling was a little weird, but I guess other people feel it too. And giving people that sense of community that they have lost since leaving the church. And this is meant as a compliment and also just a fact for our listeners here. You are the #1 podcast that people go to when they are having a faith transition because you are gentle in the way that you say things. And like we mentioned before, you're not trying to burn down the church, but you really want to help educate people and help alleviate their suffering just by showing, hey, someone else has been through this, or this is how they dealt with this problem. Maybe you could try that. Bringing on experts to talk about the history of the church. I love the whole, what was with LDS discussions?
Yeah.
Oh, such a great series where you just break down every part of the church. If people have questions about it, they can go to that. And it's just an important resource that you're providing. So thank you for that. And I think I can speak for everyone here. Thank you for what you are doing. It's immensely helpful, as you already know.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's an honor and it's a privilege, and it's fun. It's creative. Like learning new platforms. Like I started out as an audio only podcast, and to be able to like move into video, move into YouTube, and then TikTok and Instagram and social media, like it's never ending. And we've done retreats and we've done workshops and I've done individual coaching. There's so much joy in this work. So I think I'm surprised more people don't do it. I'm so like, whenever a creator comes up, I don't view him as a competitive threat. I'm like, holy smokes, we have somebody wanting to get in this work. I need more partners. I need more collaborators. We need more heroes. Like, I don't like to think of myself as a hero because that's prideful, but like, I love this idea of the Avengers or the X-Men or the superheroes, super friends. Like Wolverine's awesome, but Wolverine plus Wanda, plus Vision, plus Dr. Xavier, plus, Captain America, like that's amazing. So like, this is fun work. It's hard. It's grueling. It's painful, but it's super rewarding and it's super needed and it's understaffed.
Yeah.
So like I love how quickly your YouTube channel is growing. A huge part of that is your talent and Jonathan's support. But it's also, there's just such a need, you know? I hope you're having fun.
I am having fun.
I hope you don't go away. Because what happens
John.
is people like you come online and then they get beat up and they quit.
You know what? That's a really great point. And it is hard because it's such a big topic and it is very polarizing. I have people in the comments that are like, yes, thank you. I need your work. I need what you're offering. Thank you for doing this. And other people that are just not for it. And it can get hard, the negative criticism. So I wanted to ask you from a fellow creator's standpoint, how do you deal with negative criticism? Like, teach me the ways, because I'm only in 5 months and I'm like, oh, this kind of hurts, even though the pros definitely outweigh the cons. What are your secrets to approaching that?
I see you getting emotional again a little bit. Is that true?
Yeah, it's tough. It can be tough.
Isn't the space brutal?
Yeah.
Yeah, it just chews people up and spits them out. Like it's no joke. Like, I don't like to call the Mormon Church a cult, but like fighting against multi-$100 billion high demand religions and or cults is extremely hard and painful and punishing. It's punishing. I don't think there's another word to describe it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's super rewarding and it's super punishing. Because you've got all the Orthodox, you've got the millions of Orthodox members that all want you not to exist.
Yeah.
Right? That all want to criticize you and smear you or, criticize you. But then you've also got just, the ex-Mormon crowd, the ex-religious group can also be
It can be
toxic,
brutal too.
super toxic.
Yeah.
And even more mean-spirited and more vicious. Like, I would say, if I had to pick my top 10 most vicious adversaries, all 10 would be ex-Mormons.
Really?
Versus any Mormon apologist or Orthodox Mormon.
Interesting.
Yeah. So ex-Mormons are amazing, and then some are horrific. That's just so you get it on all sides. Anyway, I would say, just like when you play the guitar over time, you get calluses on your fingers. Part of it is just time and just taking the criticism. So that's number one. You just gotta not quit. Like, I know I'm not the smartest creator out here in ex-Mormon land. I'm not the most creative. I'm not the most attractive. Like, I'm not the most knowledgeable. I am the one who's been doing it the longest, but that's just because I started really early. There might be someone who's been doing it longer than me. But I mean, if I have a superpower, which I don't, but if I did, it would be not quitting.
Yeah.
Not quitting. Because I've had people accuse me of abusing women. I've had people accusing me of harming children. I've had people accuse me of financial impropriety. I've been smeared and defamed in ways that are not only career ending, but are life ending. And that's just that. That's just the defamation. On the whole other side of the spectrum is like, your teeth are crooked, your teeth are yellow, your nose is crooked, you're dumb, you're old, you're irrelevant, you're boring, you talk over people. And all of that's true.
That's
right?
not true.
But at the same time, like, it's hard to hear all that over time. So there's no secret sauce other than just like, you just keep playing the guitar, sometimes till your fingers bleed. And over time you develop calluses. And that's probably the number one suggestion is don't quit, Shelise.
Yeah.
Don't quit unless your physical or mental health require it. Then quit. Absolutely quit. If it's damaging your physical or mental health, quit. But if you can survive it, then you're going to flourish.
Yeah.
So don't quit.
Okay.
And just give it time. The second thing is you have to just ignore the trolls.
It's hard. It's hard to do.
I know so many creators that feel like they have to engage.
Yeah.
First of all, they have to care about what these haters say, who have no skin in the game. There's a really good Teddy Roosevelt quote that I should read, but it's, Brene Brown made it famous, but I was a Teddy Roosevelt fan before Brene Brown ever came up. But it's just this idea that like, unless you're in the ring, unless you're on the battlefield, you've got no place criticizing those of us who are. So literally, like you can literally ignore every single critic out there that isn't in this battlefield with you. And that eliminates a lot of voices, right?
Sure does.
And guess what? You're not going to hear criticisms from me because I've got too much respect for somebody who enters the arena. So you're only going to get like praise from me and support and maybe some tips. And so that really simplifies your life when you realize you can completely ignore everyone who's got anything to say about what you're doing that isn't putting their own skin in the game.
All right. That's great advice.
Are you willing? I'm not done.
I see Jonathan nodding over there.
Why are you nodding, John? No, you don't have to answer. But I'm not done. But it's harder, because so many creators this is hard enough work when you feel empowered. If you're constantly draining your emotional energy, reading and listening to, and worst of all, engaging these people that just want ill for you and that offer nothing to the world, let alone to you. And all they want to do is sap your attention, your energy, and your time. You're done. You're dead. You're dead on arrival. So you block those people. Anyone who comes to any of your channels showing mean-spiritedness, cruelty, bigotry of any sort, you block and ban them. Ain't got time for that, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to simplify your life. I used to get so much hate for censoring and moderating people. And there are other people that are going to disagree with me. And all I'm going to say is, you enter this arena for 20 years and see how long you can endure without blocking and banning the haters. But over time, I just decided they wouldn't treat me, if they were in my house, they wouldn't have the courage to say the crap that they say to me to my face, Mm-hmm. So why are we going to let them in my virtual house and let them disrespect me? No. If you disrespect me in my physical house, you're out the door. Why is it going to be any different on social media? So just liberally block and ban and most of all, ignore the haters. And by the way, what do haters want? What do they want, Shelise?
Your attention.
They want your attention.
Yeah.
They want your destruction. They want your attention, and they want your demise, and they want attention for themselves.
Yeah.
So you're only feeding them literally the food that will sustain them by paying any time of day to them. So unless it like provides you with good video, like reading the hater comments and making fun of them, like that can get you views and subscribers, right?
That's true.
So unless you're using them to grow your channel, you ignore them.
Yeah.
Don't feed the trolls. Ignore them. Block and ban
Don't
them.
feed the trolls. I need a t-shirt that says that. Don't feed the trolls.
100%. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, I love constructive criticism. So I'm not saying block and ban your critics.
Yeah.
If people come to you with reasonable, good faith suggestions, that's the only way you become successful is by listening to your critics. It's just the mean-spirited haters, not the thoughtful critics that you want to get rid of.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, you want the next little bit of advice?
Yeah.
Become financially sustainable. So like, do you know that I've done a lot of hard things in the past 20 years? Do you know what the hardest thing I ever did was?
Asking for donations?
No. That was hard.
Yeah.
That was hard. When I left Microsoft, I was making $200,000 plus a year when I left Microsoft. So that was back in 2004. Okay. So for the first 12 or 13, I don't know, I'm making this up, but let's just say for the first 12 years of Mormon Stories existence, no, probably 17. For the first, I don't know, a long time, well over a decade, I was getting paid little to nothing for doing Mormon Stories.
Yeah.
And then at some point, by not quitting, by improving and by sticking with it and trying to be creative, grow the channel, we were able to get enough revenue where at some point I was able to get to the point where I had the cash to pay myself what I was making 20 years ago.
Wow.
After 2 master's degrees and a PhD and 15 years in the business. Like finally I had the money to allow my board to pay me what my market value was. And that was terrifying to me because Mormons are the cheapest, most sort of chintzy sometimes people when it comes to people like us. They call, Thomas S. Monson, Gordon B. Hinckley, Russell M. Nelson, Dallin H. Oaks, they can pull down $300K plus a year, lifetime pensions, $1 million signing bonus. They can free health care. They can pull all that down for themselves. But as soon as somebody who's actually trying to make Mormonism a healthier, happier place tries to earn a living, the Mormon and ex-Mormon internet goes mad. They go crazy. And they're like, how dare you pay yourself a livable wage? Or, God forbid, Heavenly Father forbid, how dare you pay yourself your market value? And so the Kraken was unleashed when I allowed my board to pay me what I was making 20 years ago. And for years, I was terrified to release my financials. I did, but I was terrified. And I was mercilessly brutalized online for making a livable wage,
Which is crazy because what you do takes so much time and effort, and you are on it every single day working and doing episodes and, flying people in. The work you do, that doesn't even come close to what you should be getting paid for how much time and effort you put into it.
I easily have worked 60 hours a week for the past 20 years.
Yeah.
And the sacrifices to my family, healthcare, retirement, all sorts of things. We'll never make back the financial sacrifices we made for Mormon Stories, even at my current compensation levels. So my next thing is do not be afraid to ask for money. Ask for money, just like you asked for subscriptions and click the bell and all that. Mm-hmm. Ask for money. Get a PayPal or a donor box, and just ask people to donate. You, viewers and listeners from Cult to Consciousness, what's it called?
Cults to Consciousness.
How do they pay you right now?
I have a Patreon.
So sign up for Shalise's Patreon right now. Pay your creators for their work, or they will go away. You will lose them. How many amazing creators, like Infants on Thrones, Brother Jake, John Larson, like You're a Polygamy. Like, pick your amazing, podcast or YouTube channel that's in the boneyards that you've never heard of anymore because their creators were never paid and they got sick of it and quit. Like, don't let that happen. Why does Bill Reel and Radio Free Mormon, why are they still existing? Because they're making decent money now, right? Why am I able to exist? Because I make money. So get yourself paid. Don't be ashamed. Get all the money that you can because this is brutal work. And you viewers and listeners, step up and pay Shelise for her amazing work.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, for sure.
Great advice.
Yeah.
A lot to mull over and talk about with my producer over here.
Because if you're going to face the slings and arrows of your opposition, it's way better to do that when you're pulling home a fat or a healthy, sustainable paycheck.
Yeah.
Right?
I can focus more on it. I mean, each episode that I do with editing and recording is probably like 6-7 hours per episode.
Yeah.
And I do that weekly. So
yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You should be making at least 5 figures, if not 6. For the good you're doing, people, you should absolutely be making that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no question.
All right. Well, okay, I have one more question from me, and then I think I have one or two from our listeners here. And if this is too personal, we can skip it. I was wondering, because you are, I guess someone label you like the ultimate ex-Mormon apostate type of thing, how does your family handle this? Or what is it like for you in your personal life, being who you are and being this megaphone for Mormonism?
Thank you for asking. Margie, before I left, Margie's like, don't disclose anything about our kids. Like, allow our kids their privacy. Like, that is top of mind in this work, because by far the most painful part of all of this has been the familial pain and sacrifice that has been made by my wife, Margie, and by my 4 children. Because, whether it's trying to live in Utah when your dad is viewed as the Mormon Church's number one enemy.
Yeah.
And all the ways that they were excluded from groups and friendships were cut off and were judged and punished socially for just being my child. That's been horrific for them. And then even the things that you would assume are good, like people stopping you and thanking you for what you do, or them being noticed and maybe even being given an opportunity because they're my child. Like, it turns out that any self-respecting child wants to succeed on their own. They never want to be known as someone's kid, and they never want to get an opportunity because they're someone's kid. And so, and the last thing they want to do when they're at a jazz game or Home Depot with their dad is to be stopped by, quote, adoring fans or whatever to like, can we take a photo? They're just like, no, can I just go to the restaurant and have a meal with my dad and not be interrupted and not be stopped and not have to sit for 15 minutes while someone tells my dad their life story while we're just trying to have fun. And I'm not trying to be disparaging to the wonderful supporters that are out there, but from the perspective of Margie and my kids, it's not been good. It's been painful and very, very difficult for them, and in some ways inhumane. And then if your dad's getting smeared constantly on the internet, you're hearing the most horrific things about your dad who you love. And then you got to wade through how much of it's true, what's not true. And then even if you don't believe any of it, why are people constantly smearing my dad and having all these horrible things to say about him? That's not fun. They're often bullied. If they venture to get an Instagram account or a Twitter account, they're often bullied on social media just for being my children. So that's not fun for them. But then should they not be allowed to be on social media? And then even the thing that you would think would be best of all for them, when someone comes up to them and says, aren't you lucky to have John and Margie as your parents? Isn't it? It must be wonderful to be their children. You know, you'd think that'd be a compliment, right? But my kids are very quick to say, you know what? You don't know what it's like to be John and Margie's kids. You don't know how good of a dad John is behind the scenes. You don't know what he's like. You don't know what my parents are like. You have no idea. We're a family just like any other family. My parents have flaws and weaknesses just like everybody else. Like, why are you assuming that it's wonderful when it might be the opposite of that? So like on every level, I completely, egregiously, horrifically underestimated the pain and difficulty and cost that my family would bear for what I do.
Ultimately, do they support what you do? Do they understand it's for some sort of greater good?
For years and years and years, it was just something that Margie tolerated, like lovingly, supportingly, but annoyingly. In other words, it's like, if you got to do that Mormon Stories thing, I'll support you, but it's really painful and it's annoying and it's tedious and I'm sick of it and I wish we could just move on. You know what I mean? So for many, many years, my kids didn't care, and Margie was basically supportive, but bothered by all the things, taxed by all the things that I mentioned, always in a loving and supportive way. And then, you know, over time, all my family has become very supportive, mostly because they've become feminists, they've become intellectuals, they've become LGBT themselves or LGBTQ allies or affirming. They've seen the way the church has harmed families and people. And so they all value the social justice elements to what I do. But it's all sweet and sour for all of them. They're supportive and respectful on a level, and probably disturbed and annoyed on a level. And it's always going to be bittersweet for them. But overall, amazingly supportive. They've sacrificed unbelievable amounts for us, for you, for my viewers and listeners. And so I'm infinitely grateful and indebted to them for their support.
Yes. Shout out to John's family. Thank you for allowing him to continue this hard, grueling, but work that is helping millions of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I do have a question. Let's see. From one of our listeners here. Okay, so this is from Finding My Truest Self. What are your current beliefs or spirituality practices?
All right. Well, the term spirituality has been poisoned for me a little bit, and for many people who leave Mormonism or high demand religion, it's kind of tainted. Because it's associated with the literal idea of spirits, ghosts or spirits, and obviously for me to even entertain the word spirituality, I have to kind of define the terms. So I no longer view spirituality as like a belief in a higher power or some sort of transcendent power or a belief in spirits, just because I've seen those beliefs hijacked by infinite religions to coerce and cause undue harm to billions. Mm-hmm. So like it's triggering for me. Now that doesn't mean I don't have thoughts or feelings about God or an afterlife or whatever, but I have to define the terms. So for me, spirituality means being connected to a higher purpose, being connected to something greater than yourself. And so obviously for me, Mormon stories is my main source of spirituality, because I am constantly connected to a cause, which is the cause of truth, the cause of justice, this beautiful community that I'm a part of, humanity in a sense, helping awaken humanity to undue influence, helping people get their lives back, and then helping people live the most healthy, happy, meaningful life that they can. So for me, that's enough spirituality to last me the rest of my life. I don't need to believe in a heaven or a hell. I don't need to believe in like chakras or chi or Reiki or prophecies or scripture. Resurrection. I don't need to believe in any of that to have an incredibly fulfilling life. And then if you add to that just my love for nature, being connected to the outdoors, like between humanity and the outdoors, all my spiritual needs are getting met. Mm-hmm. Now that's kind of the term spirituality in kind of a very narrow sense. Do you have follow-up questions to that? Because there are other domains of traditional spirituality that you may have actually been asking me about.
No, I think our question asker here was more just wondering what your current beliefs are. Yeah. If it's Christian or agnosticism or...
Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. I mean, spirituality is a part of that.
So I have never once in my life identified as an atheist. So I don't identify as an atheist. And I've never identified as an agnostic, although I believe technically every human is agnostic. And what I mean by that is the term agnosticism, I think literally means do not know, does not know. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to death or an afterlife or a God, I think it's for anyone who's objective, they're going to just sort of admit that no one really knows what happens when you die. Nobody really knows if there's a God. If there's a God, nobody knows what the nature of God is. Everybody's guessing. Mm-hmm. Even if you've had a near-death experience and Jesus visited you, you don't know whether that really happened or is literally just neurochemicals coursing through your brain. You don't know. You may think you know, but tell that to the person that believes they were abducted by a UFO and had sex with an alien. There are people who would die for that belief. So how do you, as a religious person, distinguish between yourself and a QAnon person or a UFO believer? You can't. So we're all agnostic, but I don't identify as an agnostic because I believe the terms atheist and agnostic tend to polarize more than they do unite.
Right.
And I am against polarization, believe it or not, even though some people view me as extremely polarizing. I hate polarization. So I don't choose identities or really invest in terms like cult, or atheist or agnostic that just tend to turn people off. Now, I'm not against using the term cult. I think the term cult is very important. And I think studying cults and undue influence, whether it's Stephen Hassan, Lindsay, Luna Lindsay Corbden, like cult awareness and studying undue influence is crucial. So you don't need my blessing, but you have my full support in your use of the term. But I tend to not use it because I don't like to alienate the people that I want to reach.
Right.
So I have no idea if there's a God. I have no idea if there's an afterlife. I love Jesus. I love the teachings of Jesus. I also love the teachings of Buddha. I love the teachings of Lao Tzu. There's not a supernatural element to any of those teachings, but I'm better because of Eckhart Tolle. I'm better because of secular Buddhism. I'm better because of the teachings of Jesus. So any teaching that helps me be a kinder, compassionate, more loving person, I believe in. So in that sense, you could call me a Christian, but do I have an active belief that Jesus died and on the third day was resurrected and that he died for our sins and will live with them again? Again, I don't think anybody really knows. So, and then the only other caveat I'll say is, and I kind of have already said this, when it comes to things like New Age stuff, Reiki, New
Age mysticism.
New Age mysticism, a little bit, Reiki stuff, like mediums, Teal Swan, like anytime any human is claiming supernatural powers, my alarm bells go off. Because you can leave the frying pan and jump right in the fire, and you jettison your Mormon prophet or your Mormon bishop or the Mormon cult or whatever you want to call it. And then all of a sudden your spiritual advisor, your shaman, is telling you what you need to do with your life and potentially financially or sexually exploiting you. Yeah. So like claiming, I've said jokingly that like claiming to have special powers or a visitation from the divine should be made illegal. It's just too much power for anyone to have. Even somebody standing over you with their hands saying your fifth chakra is blocked and you need to unblock your fifth chakra. I've seen that be used as undue influence to control people's lives. Not to mention telling somebody, oh, I'm talking to your dead loved one that you miss, but let me channel what they want for you in your life. That's too much power. And so it's not that I'm saying all of that's invalid. It's not that I'm even criticizing people's sacred beliefs. I'm just saying any of that stuff raises immediate red flags for me just because of where I've come from. Yeah. And I say people beware of anyone claiming special powers. Chances are they want your time, your money, or your sex.
Yeah, it can get really tricky, especially when you leave a high demand group and then you see something that seems or appears to be opposite of that and jumping headfirst into that. And without realizing it, you're giving them your money and your time, everything that you were trying to avoid in this other high demand group. So it can definitely swing both ways. And there's always going to be levels within anything. Just like people always say, well, you left one cult for another, because I am more of like the law of attraction type of person. But just the same as yoga itself is not a cult, there can be cults that practice yoga. Yeah. And that's like all that they base their cult around is yogic practice. So yeah, you just have to be careful. You got to keep your eyes open. Follow the BITE model if you have any questions about, am I in a cult? Let's see, is there behavioral control, information control, thought control, emotional control? If not, if you feel like you are a self-sovereign being, which is what I promote on my podcast of consciousness. To me, consciousness is being aware of yourself, being aware of your surroundings, and being able to decide for yourself what you want to do with your life without someone else telling you what to do with your life. Just being in complete control of yourself is my motto.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And may I add, on the other extreme, do I believe that there's something propelling forward humanity? Yeah. Do I think there's awe and magic and wonder in this existence? Absolutely. Do I feel like some inexplicable force helped me do what I've done? Yes. Do I feel like that power, whatever it is, still engages my work every day? Absolutely. Do I know what that is? No. But I think it's important to have awe, a sense of awe and wonder and curiosity and even mysticism. I think there's a place for that. It just needs guardrails. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think everything just needs to be regulated and monitored in some sort of way.
Yeah.
All right. One more question before I lend a listen.
Oh, by the way, that's why your podcast is so awesome.
Oh.
Because you're focused on helping educate people so they have awareness. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all I'm trying to do is just spread awareness. I'm not trying to tear anyone down. I just want people to see things from new perspectives. And that's what people can offer when they come on my show, especially you. All right. So this next person, I don't know if they're okay with me saying their name, so we'll just leave it anonymous. What's been the most difficult thing about not being LDS anymore? Is there anything that's been more difficult after leaving the church?
I mean, there's the obvious stuff where you lose your identity, you lose your sense of morality, you lose your sense of meaning and purpose, you lose family members, you lose your friends, you lose your entire community, you lose your resolution about the afterlife, and you basically become a shell of a person. And you wonder, not only do you wonder why you exist, but you wonder who you are, and you feel resentful about all the decisions you made under false pretenses. Like other than that?
Other than that?
What's been the hardest thing about my faith crisis? No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That was a ramble. For me, it's been having, like there's a family member, a close family member who is a really important part of my immediate family, who when I come to their house to visit, they leave the house.
Oh, no.
And then because other family members are under the influence of that family member, I really don't have much a relationship with any of those other family members. So in a very real way, this sort of hard Jehovah's Witness or Scientology-like shunning, where major members of your family, you have of your immediate family, and you see them and you run into them on a weekly or monthly basis. They don't talk to you. They don't look at you. They don't want you in their lives. You don't know them and they don't know you or their kids because of their beliefs. Like that's excruciating and it torments me every day.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded every day of the ways I'm not able to be an uncle to, and certain nephews and nieces don't even know me because they think I'm evil because of, these types of relationships. So that's one thing.
Yeah,
Super
that's
hard.
difficult. And that's something that I always try and speak on to our listeners or people who have never been in high demand religions is you really do lose family members and it's so hard. And then when you have that layered on top of your family actively saying you're led by Satan, and you have the church that supports them saying that you're led by Satan, and they're getting this confirmation from the church that they truly believe in, it's really difficult to permeate that. Like you understand why they do it because the religion that they love and they believe in truly and honestly is telling them that that's how they should respond to these people who have left the church. So it's so difficult because you can't blame them, yet at the same time you want to shake them and be like, I'm a real person. I'm still great. I'm still a fun uncle. I'm fun to be around. I'm not going to give you alcohol before your legal age. I'm not going to try and tempt you and lead you down a wrong path. I just want to love you and I just want to have a relationship with you. So I can understand that, and it's really difficult, and I'm sorry you've had to go through that.
Well, it wouldn't be fair if I didn't have to deal with what every other ex-Mormon, and ex-member of a high demand religion has to deal with. So, it comes to the territory. I will say I have a lot of privilege. This podcast has afforded me a lot of privilege because on every other dimension that I mentioned to you, so like identity, I know who I am more now than I ever did as a Mormon. Morality, I'm a more moral, ethical person now than I ever was as a Mormon. I have a better marriage now than I ever did while I was a Mormon. I'm a better parent to my kids than I ever was as a Mormon. I've got closer friends now, truer friends, deeper friendships than I ever did as a Mormon.
Yeah.
I've got a better community now. And I don't sweat the afterlife. And just most of all, I love life and I love every day I wake up. So not everyone who leaves Mormonism or high demand religion is able to fill all those domains as comprehensively as I've been able to do fortunately for me. But that's why I do what I do, to help other people do that as well. Many have. And that's why I created the Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis podcast. It's at mormonfaithcrisis.com. It's 70 hours of free coaching in addition to Mormon Stories podcast, where you can learn about healthy sexuality, healthy marriage, healthy parenting, identity development, stages of grief, how to communicate with believing family and friends. It offers tools and tips and tricks for free for anyone who wants to end up feeling like their faith crisis was a gift, not a crisis. Because one of the biggest criticisms I get is from ex-Mormons that say, stop calling it a faith crisis. It's like a truth awakening. It's like a rebirth.
Yeah.
So stop calling it a crisis. It's like the best thing that could ever happen to you. And that it doesn't feel like that when you start going through it.
Yeah.
Or at least not for all people. But absolutely, more often than not, it becomes the best thing that ever happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to navigate it right and figure out how to make it an amazing thing. But for me, it's been the biggest gift of my life, for sure.
Yeah.
And it can be that for you. And that's why I do Mormon Stories podcast. That's why I release Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis podcast. And that's what cult consciousness is all about, right?
Yeah, I love ending on that high note, because I was going to go back and say, well, how are those things now that you've left and you covered it? So thank you. You read my mind. Because it can be difficult. And I think it is a crisis initially. And then once you realize that you can have all of those beautiful things outside of the church and they can be better and stronger and happier and healthier, then it does become an awakening of self when you realize, oh, wow, I have an identity besides being Mormon.
Yeah.
I can connect more with people who aren't Mormon, whereas before I was creating this wall of us versus them. I got to convert. I don't know if I really want to be their friend, but I want to bring them to the church. So it's like these false pretense friendships. So I love that you're talking about how you can get over the hurdle of the crisis and find happiness again. I think that's the biggest thing. And that's what I want to offer our listeners here, is that there is hope. And there are resources. So let's get into our Linda Listen moment. I think you wanted to go more of like the inspirational route. So it could be a sassy statement to someone who's pissed you off, or it can be some words of advice for our listeners here.
Yeah. All right, Linda, listen. This faith crisis you're going through, if you're going through it, is a gift. It's the greatest gift of your life. And even though it's incredibly painful, and you will sacrifice relationships, and you will grieve it, and you will suffer in many ways, the gift that comes out on the other side truly is the best friendships, the best marriages, the best parental relationships, the best identity, and the most joy you could ever imagine if you'll just lean into this and experience it and learn and grow and find the right mentor or the right support to help you get there. But the biggest gift of a Mormon faith crisis or of faith crisis out of a high demand religion, the biggest gift is the rest of your life, because all of us were captivated under undue influence by false pretenses. That's just a fact. We were. And so when you escape from a high demand religion, you are given an incredible amount of time and energy and resources that you get to spend, and money that you get to spend exactly as you want to. Give to the best charity that you can, have the best relationships that you can, cut people out of your life that aren't doing you any good service, and then draw to yourself relationships that are going to edify and strengthen you. And I just promise you that if you seek support and lean into this, and most importantly, get connected to yourself and learn to tap into your own wisdom and to your own sense of right and wrong and truth, joy that you cannot imagine awaits on the other side of what feels like a terrible crisis. So don't give up, and seek the joy.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Is that too long? Was that too
No,
lengthy?
it's great. The longer the better.
All right.
Do you have any final thoughts before we throw out all of your handles and ways that people can find you?
Yeah. Send her money. Sign up for her Patreon. Go to Cults to Consciousness at patreon.com. What is it?
Patreon.com/Cults to Consciousness.
Yeah.
I got to shout out Walker. He's my newest patron. Thank you, Walker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, just, I think I've said enough, but I will say, I really mean it when I say you are very talented. And I hope you continue, because you're already going gangbusters for only doing this 4 or 5 months. But I hope you eclipse me, and I think there's a good chance that you will. So I hope you'll keep going. And I'm just so thrilled you're in this space.
Wow, John, thank you. I mean, I look up to you so much and what you've been able to build in your channel. And there's been so many times where Jonathan and I are having conversation. I'm like, what does John do? I need to see how he does things, because you really created something pretty amazing that everyone can attest to the ways that you've helped them out of their faith crisis and into finding who they really are. So the respect is mutual, and I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me. We've been going for a while, and I'm just thrilled and honored that everyone can have this information for themselves. So before we go, how can people find you? What are things that you're up to? Plug any events or things you want people to come and see?
All right. So the best way you can support us is by going to YouTube and subscribing to the Mormon Stories Podcast YouTube channel. We're trying to reach 100,000 subscribers, which for us is a huge milestone.
Yeah, it's huge.
We've been doing this for a long time, and we're just going to reach it in the next couple months. So please go subscribe to us there. Please follow us or subscribe to us on TikTok. Our TikTok channel is over 200,000.
Yeah, you guys are killing it.
We're over 210 now. And TikTok is like, it's like fentanyl. It's like crack. I mean, it's just like, it's social media on steroids.
It's the wild, wild west of social media.
Well, yeah, but it's also like where else can you create a 1 minute thing, spend a couple minutes to create a 1 minute piece of content that's going to reach 6 million people? Yeah. Like it's amplified in just unbelievable ways. I've been doing podcasting for 18 years. And nowadays I walk around Utah and people are like, "Are you the TikToker?"
Oh,
I'm like,
wow.
I've been doing TikTok for like 15 minutes and people are and I've been doing podcasting for 18 years and people are recognizing me as a TikToker.
Yeah.
That's how powerful TikTok is. Mm-hmm. So anyway, subscribe to us on Mormon Stories Podcast TikTok channel. Please follow us and subscribe to us on Facebook, Mormon Stories Podcast channel, and on Instagram. We're on all those platforms. We love it when people are able and willing to donate, become a monthly donor.
Send this guy some money.
There you go. You can go to mormonstories.org and then click on the donate button, become a monthly donor. We're transparent in our finances. And we try to spend every dollar supporting people who are in need. So after you support Cults to Consciousness financially, become a donor to Mormon Stories Podcast and subscribe and follow, and then share our content. Spread the word, because word of mouth is a great way to get this stuff out there.
Yeah. Awesome. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much again, John. It's been a pleasure getting to interview you. And thank you so much to our listeners. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.